I went back to my old mic setup. So, um,
Right on.
but if you or anybody else hears a whole bunch of static, let me know, and that will be useful information. I probably can't do anything about it today, but
Will do.
okay. So today we're reviewing one of the 2020 debates between Biden and Trump. This is kind of something I've had in the back of my mind that we might want to do for a while. We reviewed a historical presidential debate before, and now we're moving to a more contemporary one. Do you have anything you want to say about this before we get onto it?
I'm really looking forward to see our boy Dark Brandon slay the beast. No, more seriously, I think the it's always really interesting to see these debates and how different they are, I think, than like how I think sort of debates are handled in this space or more like interpersonally. It's really interesting to see sort of I think what is very intentional, um, changing what you're trying to do in terms of the appeal, right? It's very much a advertisement and less like a sort of truth-seeking exercise. And it's always just sort of interesting to see sort of the techniques that each side use in order to try and get to that end, where you're not really trying to, demonstrate, judge, look at my link flow here. I've clearly proven him wrong. No, you're trying to increase your chances of winning the presidency, which usually means getting people to like you and vote for you. So it's just, I always really enjoy looking at debates where a person has a certain motive and seeing how do they go about trying to achieve that motive.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. It's it's even more blatantly an advertisement than other forms of debate that we've seen. Like I think normally it is the case that people go into debates just having a predetermined conclusion in mind that they're trying to argue for. Rather than trying to figure it out through the debate, but I think this is like the clearest possible example of that because it's not like Biden's ever gonna in the middle of the debate go like, "Oh, yeah, the good point. Maybe I
That's a
will
good
actually."
point. Yeah. Yeah, I mean the closest you ever get is oh God, I can't remember his name, but it was the admiral who got chosen as the VP by I want to say like Gore or
Stockdale.
yeah.
So it,
Who am I? Why am I here? And it's just I was like, dude, do not say that.
yeah, this was Ross Perot's VP pick.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Ross Perot famously ran that third party campaign in 2000. And his vice president he selected was a highly respected, like, admiral from the Navy. Very highly respected, but not a politician at all. And really, not someone that the American public knew. And so it was very much like, who is this guy? And the first debate, he sort of tried to play it off joking, like, who am I? Why am I here? And it was a joke because, like, that's what everyone thought. But it just kind of reinforced the idea that, like, yeah, dude, you don't belong here. You're not a vice president. You're like an admiral.
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, he succeeded at making the joke, but it was funny at his own expense. Like,
Yeah. He wasn't playing. He was trying to play it off as a joke, but instead he was playing into it, I think.
yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, well, I'm ready whenever you are.
Yeah.
Good evening from the Health Education campus of Case Western Reserve University and the Cleveland Clinic. I'm Chris Wallace of Fox News, and I welcome you to the first of the 2020 presidential debates between President Donald J. Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. This debate is sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. The commission has designed the format, 6 roughly 15-minute segments with 2-minute answers from each candidate to the first question, then open discussion for the rest of each segment. Both campaigns have agreed to these rules. For the record, I decided the topics and the questions in each topic. I can assure you, none of the questions has been shared with the commission or the two candidates. This debate is being conducted under health and safety protocols designed by the Cleveland Clinic, which is serving as the health security advisor to the commission for all 4 debates. As a precaution, both campaigns have agreed that candidates will not shake hands at the beginning of tonight's debate. The audience here in the hall has promised to
This happened in the middle of
silent.
COVID
No
for anybody
cheers,
who's
no
wondering
boos
why
or
that
other
was.
interruptions, so we, and more importantly you, can focus on what the candidates have to say. No noise except right now, as we welcome the Republican nominee, President Trump, and the Democratic nominee, Vice President Biden.
How you doing, man? I'm well.
How you doing, man? God, I fucking love Biden.
Gentlemen, a lot of people have been waiting for this night, so let's get going. Our first subject is the Supreme Court. President Trump, you nominated Amy Coney Barrett over the weekend to succeed the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the court. You say the Constitution is clear about your obligation and the Senate's to consider a nominee to the court. Vice President Biden, you say that this is an effort by the president and Republicans to jam through an appointment and what you call an abuse of power. My first question to both of you tonight: why are you right in the argument you make and your opponent wrong? And where do you think a Justice Barrett would take the court? President Trump, in this first segment, you go first. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chris. I will tell you very simply, we won the election. Elections have consequences. We have the Senate, we have the White House, and we have a phenomenal nominee, respected by all, top academic, good in every way, In fact, some of her biggest endorsers are very liberal people from Notre Dame and other places. So I think she's going to be fantastic. We have plenty of time, even if we did it after the election itself. I have a lot of time after the election, as you know. So I think that she will be outstanding. She's going to be as good as anybody that has served on that court. We really feel that. We have a professor at Notre Dame, highly respected by all, said she's the single greatest student he's ever had. He's been a professor for a long time at a great school. And we won the election, and therefore we have the right to choose her. And very few people knowingly would say otherwise. And by the way, the Democrats, they wouldn't even think about not doing it. If they had, the only difference is they're trying to do it faster. There's no way they would give it up. They had Merrick Garland, but the problem is they didn't have the election, so they were stopped. And probably that would happen in reverse also. Definitely would happen in reverse. So we won the election, and we have the right to do it, Chris.
President Trump, thank you. Same question to you, Vice President Biden. You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, thank you for doing this and looking forward to this, Mr. President.
Thank you, Joe.
The American people have a right to have a say in who the Supreme Court nominee is. And that say occurs when they vote for a United States senators and when they vote for the President of the United States. They're not going to get that chance now because we're in the middle of an election already. The election has already started. Tens of thousands of people have already voted. And so the thing that should happen is we should wait. We should wait and see what the outcome of this election is, because that's the only way the American people get to express their view is by who they elect as president and who they elect as vice president. Now, what's at stake here?
Can we pause for a
the president's
second?
made it clear-
Yeah.
I really hate the argument that Joe Biden is making here because I mean
Sorry, go for it.
he's essentially presenting the same justification that Mitch McConnell gave for stopping Merrick Garland.
Yeah, the real argument you should make is like, listen, dude, if you want the rules to be what it was during Merrick Garland, you can't pull this shit. But like, you just can't get into like that nuance of a debate and be like, well, folks, the thing is that if we undermine our culture of norms inside the procedures of the Senate for nominating these things in a one-sided fashion, it creates a race to the bottom where we try to chip away at all of our institutions as much as we can to benefit ourselves. Which will all like you just can't say that. So it's like you have to make like the bad argument.
And I feel like just opening up on this topic, this has got to be like the strongest topic you could choose for Trump, just because like this is the biggest accomplishment of his presidency is changing the Supreme Court the way he did. I think his argument for why it works is a lot more straightforward because all he has to do is just present the traditional case and just ignore the Merrick Garland thing. I don't think he should have even brought it up. Really, it's like like all he has to do is go we won the election and that's how the
most
Supreme
people
Court
probably
worked.
don't even know about Merrick Garland, or the entire shit show that was. So like, yeah, it's just ignore it and move on.
Trump should probably just ignore it and move on because then if Biden even tries to bring it up, then he's going to be the one stuck trying to make a convoluted, bad-sounding argument. But, I mean, I think Trump just can't help himself to blurt out whatever's on his mind. But I mean, this is. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing. I think that this is not a good argument to make in terms of arguments, in terms of like the actual evaluating the arguments, but in terms of like effective strategy, I think this is what Biden should go for. I think it's a pretty decent appeal to make the American people. It's like, man, we're in the middle of the election right now. You know, if you're all pro democracy, why not let us vote on it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Here, he wants to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. He's been running on that. He ran on that, and he's been governing on that. He's in the Supreme Court right now trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which will strip 20 million people from having insurance, health insurance now, if it goes into court. And the justice, and I'm not opposed to the justice. She seems like a very fine person. But she's written before she went on the bench, which is her right, that she thinks that the Affordable Care Act is not constitutional. The other thing that's on the court, and if it's struck down, what happens? Women's rights are fundamentally changed. Once again, a woman could be held pay more money because she has a pre-existing condition of pregnancy. They were able to charge a woman more for the same exact procedure a man gets. And that ended when we, in fact, passed the Affordable Care Act. And there's 100 million people who have pre-existing conditions, and they'll be taken away as well. Those pre-existing conditions, the insurance companies are going to love this. And so it's just not appropriate to do this before this election. If he wins the election and the Senate is Democrat or Republican, then he goes forward. If not, we should wait until February.
All right. There aren't 100 million people with pre-existing conditions. As far as the say is concerned, the people already had their say. Okay, Justice Ginsburg said very powerfully, very strongly, at some point, 10 years ago or so, she said a president and the Senate is elected for a period of time, but a president's elected for 4 years. We're not elected for 3 years. I'm not elected for 3 years. So we have the Senate, we have a president.
He's elected to the next
during
election.
that period of time, we have an opening. I'm not elected for 3 years. I'm elected for 4 years. And the 100 million people, Joe, the 100 million people is totally wrong. I don't know where you got that number. The bigger problem that you have is that you're going to extinguish 180 million people with their private health care that they're very
That's
happy
simply
with.
not true.
Well, you're certainly going to
That-
socialist.
Go
You're
ahead.
going to socialist medicine.
We're now into, gentlemen, we're now into open discussion.
Open discussion.
Open discussion. Yes, I agree. Go ahead, Vice President.
Number one, he knows that what I proposed. What I proposed is that we expand Obamacare and we increase it. We do not wipe any. And one of the big debates we had with 23 of my colleagues trying to win the nomination that I won, were saying that Biden wanted to allow people to have private insurance still. They can. They do. They will under my proposal.
It's not what you've said,
But
and it's not what
that
your party
is-
has said.
that is simply
Your party
a lie.
doesn't say it. Your
That
party
is
wants to
simple.
go socialist
My
medicine
party is
and
me.
socialist
right
healthcare.
now, I am
And
the
they're going to
Democratic
dominate
Party.
you, Joe. You know that.
I am the Democratic Party right now. The platform of the
Not according
Democratic
to
Party
Harris.
is what I, in fact, approved of. What I approved of. Now, here's the deal. The deal is that it's going to wipe out pre-existing conditions. And by the way, the 200,000 people that have died on his watch, how many of those have survived? Well, there's 7 million people that contracted COVID. What does it mean for them going forward if you strike down the Affordable Care Act. And
Joe, you've had
pre-existing
308,000 military people dying because you couldn't provide them proper health care in the military. So don't tell me
I'm
about
happy
this.
to talk about
And
this.
if you were here,
Look,
it
here's
wouldn't
the
be
deal.
200, it would be 2 million people because you were very late on the draw. You
Late
didn't
on
want
the
me to
draw.
ban China, which was heavily infected. You didn't want me to ban
All right, gentlemen,
Europe, which
no,
was heavily
Mr. President,
You would have
Mr.
been much
President,
later, Joe.
Mr. President,
Much later.
Mr.
You're
President,
talking about 2 million people.
You're
Mr.
not gonna be able
President,
to
as
shut
the
him up.
moderator, we are going to talk about COVID in the next segment, but go ahead.
Let me finish. The point is that the president also is opposed to Roe v. Wade. That's on the ballot as well in the court. And so that's also at stake right now. And so the election is already
You don't know it's on the
begun.
ballot.
I-
Why is it on the ballot?
Because
Why is
you
it on the
said
ballot? It's not
you-
on the ballot.
It's on the ballot in the
I
court.
don't think so.
In the court. Well,
There's nothing happening there.
Donald, would you
You
just
don't
be quiet
know
for a
her
minute?
view on Roe v. Wade. You
I
don't
don't
know her
know.
view.
Well, all right, let's talk. We got a lot to unpack here, gentlemen. We got a lot of time. So, on health care, and then we'll come back to Roe v. Wade.
All right.
I was gonna say, man, I don't know. I really don't. I think it actually reminds me of something I said about Obama previously, which was Obama's greatest strength was the fact that he was able to placate both sort of wings of the Democratic Party. And I guess there's not just both wings, but the many different parts of the Democratic Party, even though he really didn't do anything, right? Like, there's a lot of people that were a lot further on the left in, like, 2008 and 2012 that were placated by Obama, even though he was a pretty moderate guy. And man, it kind of feels like Trump's the same way, where Trump could just be like, "Yeah, we don't care about abortion. Abortion's not a big deal to us. We're not trying to fight for abortion." And like, no one in the Republican Party is like, "What the hell?" Like, no one, like, he doesn't have this problem. God, yeah. And now, the more I think about this, I'm reminded in 2016 when he talked about supporting Planned Parenthood. Like, imagine a Republican in 2016 being like, "Yeah, I think Planned Parenthood does some good stuff. You know, it's not all bad. You know, there's some good stuff in there." Like, normally that would get you killed. But Trump just has this aesthetic where people are just like are willing to ignore that stuff. I mean, I think very similar to Obama. And God, that's such a source of strength for him.
Yeah, and Trump in particular is able to just talk out of both sides of his mouth and somehow get away with it. He can just, go tell pro-life people like, yeah, we're obviously we're gonna stack the court with pro-life judges and get Roe v. Wade overturned, and then he can go to everybody else and go like, what are you talking about? We're not gonna do that. I don't know.
It is a true gift.
Mr. President, the Supreme Court will hear a case a week after the election in which the Trump administration, along with 18 state attorneys general, are seeking to overturn
That's right.
Obamacare, to end Obamacare.
Wait, so that's just a direct contradiction of what he just said. He's like, "Yep, that's right. I agree."
And obviously the Roe v.
You
Wade
spent
thing
a lot-
happens, like
Also,
a year later.
Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't been around for the last couple of months. Roe v. Wade was in fact on the ballot with Justice Barrett in the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Because they want to give good health care.
If I may ask
Go
my
ahead.
question, sir.
Good health care.
Over the last 4 years, you have promised to repeal and replace Obamacare, but you have never in these 4 years come up with a plan, a comprehensive plan
Yes,
to
I have.
replace Obamacare.
Of course I have.
Well, I'll
I
give
got
you an
rid of
op-
the
I'm gonna-
individual
when I finish,
mandate.
I'm going to give you an
Excuse me.
opportunity.
I got rid of the individual mandate, which was a
That is
big
not a
chunk of
comprehensive
Obamacare. That
plan.
is absolutely a big thing. That was the worst
I
part
didn't
of
ask you,
Obamacare.
sir.
Chris,
You're
that was the
debating him,
worst
not
part of
me.
Obamacare.
Let me ask my
Well,
question.
I'll ask Joe.
No,
The individual
I-
mandate was the most unpopular
Vice Pre-
aspect of
Mr.
Obamacare. I
President,
got rid of it.
I'd like
and
you
we
to-
will
Mr.
protect people
President,
with
I'm the
pre-existing
moderator of this
conditions.
debate, and I would like you to let me ask my question, and then you can answer.
Go
your
ahead.
question. You, in the course of these 4 years, have never come up with a comprehensive plan to replace Obamacare, and just this last Thursday, you signed a largely symbolic executive order to protect people with pre-existing conditions 5 days before this debate. So my question, sir, is what is the Trump health care
All
plan?
right. Well, first of all, I guess I'm debating you, not him, but that's okay. I'm not surprised. Let me just tell you something, that there's nothing symbolic. I'm cutting drug prices. I'm going with favored nations, which no president has the courage to do because you're going against Big Pharma. drug prices will be coming down 80 or 90%. You could have done it during your 47-year period in government, but you didn't do it.
I like how he
So we're
gets
cutting
asked
healthcare.
about what's his plan, and he just goes straight to outcomes. He's like, "I'm cutting drug prices. They're gonna drop." Like, how? Don't worry about it.
He doesn't answer the question at all. It's funny, in the first back and forth, he said, well, what's your replacement? And he says, what do you mean? I got rid of this huge thing that was really unpopular. It's like, it's just proving the exact part of the question, which is like, okay, you're getting rid of a bad thing. What are you going to replace it with?
All of the things that we've done, insulin. I give you an example. Insulin. It was destroying families, destroying people because I'm getting it for so cheap. It's like water. You want to know the truth? So cheap. Take a look at all of the drugs what we're doing, prescription drug prices. We're going to allow our governors now to go to other countries to buy drugs because they pay just.
You're going to be bathing in insulin.
He's outsourcing it. He's not buying American made. What the hell?
No, but this is big stuff.
Sir, you'll be happy. I'm about to pick up on one of your points to ask the vice president, which is he points out that you would like to add a public option to Obamacare. And the argument that he makes and other Republicans make is that is going to end private insurance.
It is not.
I can ask you the question. It will end.
What your party says, by the way.
It will end private insurance and create a government takeover of health care.
It does not. It's only for those people who are so poor they qualify for Medicaid. They can get that free in most states, except governors who want to deny people who are poor Medicaid. Anyone who qualifies for Medicare Medicaid would automatically be enrolled in the public option. The vast majority of the American people would still not be in that option. Number one.
Joe, you agreed with Bernie Sanders, who's far left, on the manifesto, we call it, and that gives you socialized medicine.
Look, hey,
I'm
not going to listen to him. The fact of the matter is, I beat Bernie Sanders.
Not by much.
I beat him a whole hell of a lot. I'm here standing facing you, old buddy.
Pocahontas would have left 2 days early. You would have lost every prize.
All he knows how to do is
Super Tuesday. You got very lucky.
Here's the deal. I got very lucky. I'm going to get very lucky tonight as well. And tonight I'm going to make sure, because here's the deal. The fact is that everything he's saying so far is simply a lie. I'm not here to call out his lies. Everybody knows he's a liar.
But
I just want to make sure.
I wonder if he was coached to not say malarkey, because
he should lean into it.
He's had probably like 4 or 5 opportunities already to pull out some malarkey, and instead he's just like, that's a lie. That's a lie.
Yeah.
Graduated last in your class, not first in your class.
I want to make sure.
Mr. President, can you let him finish, sir?
No, he doesn't know how to do that. He has, you picked the wrong guy, the wrong night at the wrong time.
Listen, you agreed with Bernie Sanders to the manifesto.
The whole idea,
let him,
there is no manifesto. Number two.
You just lost the left.
Number two.
You just lost the left. You agreed with Bernie Sanders on a plan.
Folks,
absolutely agreed.
Folks, do you have any idea what this clown's doing?
They call it socialized medicine.
Mr. President.
So first off, the implication that he lost the left, so he doesn't believe in these radical things. That seems like a pretty big contradiction. He can't be saying, oh, you're beholden to the radical left ideas. You just lost the left, all right? Like, I feel like, man, that's such a great, like, there's so many times where I really wonder if there would be, like, I know it's like the funny, it's like the shower dream everyone has, but like, oh, if I was on the presidential stage. But damn, there's some real opportunities to be like, oh, I just lost the left? So you mean I don't support these radical left ideas? Like, jump on that immediately. Like, I mean, of course, it's hard to, have those realizations in the moment as opposed to watching it. But man, there's a lot of opportunities, I feel like, on both sides to leap on and sort of be like, oh, what'd you just say? Did you just contradict yourself? We all just heard that, right? As opposed to just sort of creating what appears to just be like a vortex of just like gotcha, like points, random like stats that like, oh, my plan's going to get us, an extra, insulin's going to be as cheap as water, stuff like this. There's not really a cohesive flow of the arguments, but it feels like there's some opportunities to really point out that flow and places where your opponent contradicted themselves if you really just jumped in there.
Yeah, I wonder though, is it more effective for Biden to be like jumping all over Trump's weaknesses and trying to kind of like beat him at his own game, or is it more effective to create a contrast and just try to I don't know, look like the adult next to this like child up there on stage,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, it's so hard to evaluate all the different sort of groups of Americans and how they sort of react to these kinds of things. Like one thing I really notice in like sort of the discourse of like online politics is how much people underestimate sort of a stereotypical like liberal boomer, sort of the opposite of someone who's like on like Facebook, like QAnon pages, but someone who's on like who's like on Facebook Occupy Democrats and stuff like this, believing just every random story they see about like a cop being like too brutal with like a suspect, or like some form of discrimination in businesses. There's a real undercurrent of that kind of liberal boomer that's like, yeah, that Trump, he's up to no good. He's just a racist, and I wonder how much, I mean, that's a huge, like, chunk of the population out there. And you wonder if fighting over trying to appear as like the macho debate man is a lost cause and it's just going to weaken your support within the bases that are your bread and butter, like those liberal boomers, and instead try and fight for scraps over like let's say like young men that are like on the internet, where it's like that's like a losing battle.
Yeah, and also the liberal boomer you're describing, that might be like the median voter in the median
Yeah.
swing state voter or something. That might be like,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the other thing as well. You're not just talking about groups in America. You're talking about groups in certain places, which just adds a huge, like, sort of twist to the entire thing.
and there's a lot of talk about like the median swing state voters are just like some elderly or middle-aged white Catholic or something, and that it's Joe Biden exactly. He is their demographic.
Yeah.
What? He is not for any help for people needing health care because he in fact already has cost 10 million people their health care that they had from their employers because of his recession. Number one. Number two, there are 20 million people getting health care through Obamacare now that he wants to take it away. He won't ever look you in the eye and say that's what he wants to do. Take it away.
No, I want to give them better health care at a much lower price because
by the way, he doesn't know how. He doesn't know how to do that.
Fixed it.
He has never.
Like there, you should just jump in and be like, "Oh, I want to give everyone chocolate rivers and houses made of candy. What's your plan?" Like, oh man, I don't know. It's just.
Yeah,
I want put Destiny up here. That's what I want to see. I want to see the Big D man take it to Trump in the arena of ideas.
well, the thing is, like, Destiny has his own platform where he can already talk to the kind of people who like to watch Destiny, right? I'm not sure he'd be the more effective person to put on a stage like this. I mean, maybe he would, maybe not. Hard to say.
Yeah, not. I think it's sort of the example that proves the idea that like, yeah, being like the ultimate debate bro, which is a term I wear. It's a badge I wear with honor. Being the ultimate debate bro doesn't actually mean being the most effective persuader all the time, and there are certain contexts where it really can backfire and not go well.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure we'd necessarily, that the Republicans would do better to have Ben Shapiro up there trying to make Biden look stupid or something like.
Yeah,
perhaps
I think it would be nice to just see it once, though. Just one time. I want to see, what the presidents have elected their champions to represent them. Is taking the stage now. Stephen Bottle, Ben Shapiro, whoever it would be. Yeah, that would be just one time. I'd like to see it happen.
Yeah, it'd be funny.
It would be funny.
Fixed it to an extent.
He has never done a
as you might
thing.
know, but probably don't.
Gentlemen, you realize if you're both speaking at the same time,
and it's too expensive.
let the presidents go ahead, sir.
Obamacare is no good. We made it better, and I had a choice to make very early on. We took away the individual mandate. We guarantee pre-existing conditions, but took away the individual mandate. Listen, this is the way it is, and that destroyed. That they shouldn't even call it Obamacare. Then I had a choice to make. Do I let my people run it really well or badly? If I run it badly, they'll probably blame him, but they'll blame me. But more importantly, I want to help people, okay? I said, you got to run it so well. And I just had a meeting with them. They said, the problem is no matter how well you run Obamacare, it's a disaster. It's too expensive, premiums are too high, and it doesn't work. So we do want to get rid of it. Chris, we want to get rid of it.
I understand it, sir, but I have to give you roughly equal time. Please let the vice president talk.
Good.
He has no plan for health care.
Of course we do.
Please.
He sends out wishful thinking. He has executive orders that have no power. He hasn't lowered drug costs for anybody. He's been promising a health care plan since he got elected. He has none, like almost everything else he talks about. He does not have a plan. He doesn't have a plan. And the fact is, this man doesn't know what he's talking about.
All right,
He's
I have one final question for you,
Sure.
Mr. Vice President. If Senate Republicans, we were talking originally about the Supreme Court here, if Senate Republicans go ahead and confirm Justice Barrett, there has been talk about ending the filibuster or even packing the court, adding to the 9 justices there. You call this a distraction by the president, but in fact, it wasn't brought up by the president. It was brought up by some of your Democratic colleagues in the Congress. So my question to you is, you have refused in the past to talk about it. Are you willing to tell the American people tonight whether or not you will support either ending the filibuster or packing the court?
Whatever position I take in that, that'll become the issue. The issue is the American people should speak. You should go out and vote. You're in voting now. Vote and let your senators know how strongly you feel. Vote now.
Are you gonna pack the
Make
court?
sure you, in fact, let people know
He doesn't wanna
you're a
answer the
senator.
question.
I'm not going to answer the question
Why
because
wouldn't you answer that
because
question?
the question
the
the question
Supreme Court
is
Justice,
the
radical
question.
left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe?
This
Who's
is
on your
so
list?
All right, gentlemen, I think
This
we've
is
ended
so
this.
He's going to pack the court.
We have
I'm not going to give a list.
We have ended this segment. We're going to move on to the second segment.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? Keep yapping, man.
The people understand.
Can we pause?
They sure do.
47 years.
What do you think about the idea that maybe they should just have their mics muted when it's not their turn to talk? Like maybe they just shouldn't be able to interrupt each other.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you push too far, there's the risk that, they'll just opt out, which I think, I don't know, God, I don't want to just repeat a headline I saw, but hasn't there been some rumblings about the Republicans withdrawing from presidential debates for the next election?
That's what I thought I read, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that had actually been done. I mean, of course, it could be undone. It's all on paper for now. We'll wait to see when the rubber really hits the road. But man, yeah, that would be. It's like you almost. The fact that you need to do that is almost like a sad defeatment in itself. But yeah, I wonder what it would look like. I mean, there's also a risk that, if you come down too hard, you're going to look biased and people are going to sort of jump ship anyways. I don't think it's a stretch to say Trump would be getting muted way more than Biden here. And if that happens, they're just going to have a field day censoring the president of the United States of America, stuff like that. But yeah, I really do wonder, Chris Wallace is obviously an amazing reporter and very experienced in doing more cordial debates. But when it starts getting into more like mudslinging like this, you almost wonder if it's like, yeah, send Prime K's in there, send Austin, like keep not kick. I don't know. You almost don't want to stoop to that level by having to implement mutes and stuff like that because it feels like it sort of reinforces it. But equally, you don't want to just let it run amok.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the way I was picturing it was not so much like mute them when they're interrupting. I guess I was picturing like they're just muted by default, and then we unmute them when it's their turn to talk.
That's actually a really big difference. If it was just the case that, because the equivalent would almost be like one person takes the stage, then they leave the stage, and another person takes the stage. Yeah, that's actually that's a really good idea, at least in terms of avoiding some of the things I was worried about.
Yeah, I think it does avoid the things that you're worried about. It still has pros and cons to it, right? Because interruptions aren't necessarily always a bad thing. But
that the tough thing in a conversation is knowing when you can interrupt and when you should and shouldn't interrupt. Like if someone's like misunderstanding a point you're making, and you're like, oh, sorry, just to clarify, blah 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 blah, and they're like, oh, okay, and then they can move on. Versus the nightmare scenario, you think they're misunderstanding you, but actually you're misunderstanding them and they are understanding you. And then you just derail the conversation for like 3 minutes and a half. Yeah, that's a really hard thing to know. And it's a real skill you have to know for like panels and stuff, is knowing when you can interrupt and when you can't.
Yeah, Trump is kind of like the worst case scenario for interruptions, right? He's somebody who will just never shut up, never stop talking.
Yeah.
But I guess the format that this is supposed to have is like this candidate answer this question, then this candidate answer this question, then a few minutes of open discussion, and then you could, the way that I was imagining was perhaps like they start out both muted. Okay, unmute you for a couple minutes while you answer this question, then mute you again, unmute you for a couple minutes while you answer the question, then
Mhm.
both unmuted for a couple minutes, and then like in the last segment they would be able to interrupt each other.
Dude, and then for $59.99, you can buy the tape so you can watch what they were saying when they were muted. You can see what Trump's reaction was when he couldn't talk and Biden was going on. Like you could dude, you can make some serious bank off of that.
So you ever seen like Prime will have like if you give him enough subs he'll mute one of the panelists.
That's evil, dude. I mean, I respect the grind set, but yeah, I always feel bad when that happens to someone.
Yeah, for sure. But can you imagine that on like a presidential stage or something? It's like donate enough I don't know, this presidential
You'd have to set
campaign.
it to a ridiculous height in order for it to not be like just everyone gets muted constantly. It'd
Donate
have to be
$50 million.
not even a million. It'd have to be like $50 million or something, dude.
Yeah.
You just imagine like the CIA trying to like backtrack the finances. It's like Putin is donating $50 million to shut Biden up. It's like, holy shit, that would be so funny. I mean, the real thing that would happen is like someone like like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, like one of the like 50 people who has like a ridiculous like insane wealth would just walk up and be like, yeah, this is happening. Like I'm just gonna hit this button over and over and over again. Like you can't stop me.
Yeah, so then maybe if that happens, then we just get to raise a huge amount of money for some charity or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
You've done nothing. They understand.
All right. The second subject is COVID-19. It is an awfully serious subject, so let's try to be serious about it. We have had more than 7 million cases of coronavirus in the United States, and more than 200,000 people have died. Even after we produce a vaccine, experts say that it could be months or even years before we come back to anything approaching normal. My question for both of you is, based on what you have said and done so far and what you have said you would do starting in 2021, why should the American people trust you more than your opponent to deal with this public health crisis going forward? In this case, the question goes to you first, sir. 2 minutes uninterrupted.
Good luck. 200,000 dead. As you said, over 7 million infected in the United States. We, in fact, have 4% of the world's population, 20% of the deaths. 40,000 people a day are contracting COVID. In addition to that, about between 750 and 1,000 people a day are dying. When he was presented with that number, he said, it is what it is. Well, it is what it is because you are who you are. That's why it is. The president has no plan. He hasn't laid out anything. He knew all the way back in February how serious this crisis was. He knew it was a deadly disease. What did he do? He's on tape as acknowledging he knew it. He said he didn't tell us or give people a warning of it because he didn't want to panic the American people. You don't panic. He panicked. In addition to that, what did he do? He went in and we were insisting that the people we had on the ground in China should be able to go to Wuhan and determine for themselves how dangerous this was. He did not even ask Xi to do that. He told us what a great job Xi was doing. He said we owe him a debt of gratitude for being so transparent with us. And what did he do then? He then did nothing. He waited and waited and waited. He still doesn't have a plan. I laid out back in March exactly what we should be doing. And I laid out again in July what we should be doing. We should be providing all the protective gear possible. We should be providing the money the House has passed in order to be able to go out and get people the help they need to keep their businesses open schools. It costs a lot of money. You should get out of your bunker and get out of the sand trap and get in your golf course and go in the Oval Office and bring together the Democrats and Republicans and fund what needs to be done now to save lives.
So if we would have listened.
It's just another instance. And I myself forget about this. The amazing double talk that Trump gets away with on China, where Trump's always talking about, oh, I'm tough on China, I hate China. You talk to your Republican Trump's boards always talk about, oh, China's the big threat, and Joe Biden isn't tough enough on China. And Trump is so masturbatory to the Chinese government. It's crazy. Like I didn't even. I like to think that, I'm decently informed. I like to follow the news. And even I missed a bunch of this shit. Not only is it absolutely true that, Trump talked about how amazing of a job China was doing and we owe Xi Jinping a debt of gratitude. But I didn't even realize this. Trump did canceled a huge visit we had to Taiwan from one of our diplomats in order to signal that and said, no, 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 you cannot do that. You cannot get away with that. And if you look at some of the negotiations in terms of lifting farming tariffs coming up to the 2020 election that Trump was trying to do with China, man, I do not know how he gets away with it, where none of the people that are, rabid for hating on China for anything, give a solitary fuck that Trump just bends over to them.
The one that I thought was craziest was Xi Jinping gave himself a new title. I think he became president for life or something like that. And I remember Trump made some comment about that, congratulating him on how great it is that he appointed himself dictator for life or something like that.
Wait, you have 2 minutes, sir.
If we would have listened to you, the country would have been left wide open. Millions of people would have died, not 200,000, and one person is too much. It's China's fault. It should have never happened. They stopped it from going in, but it was China's fault. And by the way, when you talk about numbers, you don't know how many people died in China. You don't know how many people died in Russia. You don't know how many people died in India. They don't exactly give you a straight count, just so you understand. But if you look at what we've done, I closed it, and you said he's xenophobic. He's a racist, and he's xenophobic. Because you didn't think I should have closed our country. Wait a minute.
It's his 2 minutes.
You didn't think we should have closed our country because you thought it was terrible. You wouldn't have closed it for another 2 months. By my doing it early, in fact, Dr. Fauci said, President Trump saved thousands of lives. Many of your Democrat governors said, President Trump did a phenomenal job. We worked with the governor. Oh, really? Go take a
Okay,
look.
can we pause for a second? I found the quote. It's actually even worse than I remembered. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I just looked it up as well.
yeah, he's now president for life, and he's great, Trump said, according to audio of excerpts of Trump's remarks at a closed-door fundraiser in Florida aired by CNN. And look, he was able to do that. I think it's great. Maybe we'll have to give that a shot someday.
Oh man, it's just people. Yeah, I'm convinced that the real Trump derangement syndrome is how there's a whole swath of people on the right that just don't even blink at a statement like that. They're just yeah, it's just Trump being Trump. Like, how deranged do you have to be to hear the president praising the dictator of China, giving himself dictator for life powers, and saying maybe we'll have to give that a shot someday. Bro, could you imagine if there was a clip of Obama saying that? Oh my God, the country, there would be states seceding. There would be militias taking up arms. Oh my God, it's just crazy, man.
Yeah, I remember there were people during Obama's tenure who were panicking and saying he's going to make himself a dictator or something, and we were
Yeah, there was a huge panic about the authoritarian Obama, because the whole Tea Party movement came out of this huge groundswelling of anti-Obama sentiment. Whether that's because of Obamacare or just anti-general establishment or sprinkle in a little bit of racism for the first black president. That's probably a bit of column A, a bit of column B, a bit of column C. But yeah, there was a real legitimate concern. I remember Jade Helm 15, this conspiracy theory that the U.S. military was going to invade and subjugate Texas. And I think it was the governor of Texas at the time, who I think was Greg Abbott, had to put out a statement I'll be looking into this. I'll be making sure that that the U.S. military doesn't invade and subjugate Texas. And it's just yeah, I don't. It's just people are crazy. The internet is making people lose their minds.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Trump was sending the National Guard into United States cities, praising Xi for becoming president for life.
Yeah, and now and try and lie about the election results. It's damn, dude. Talks like a duck, quacks like a duck. But people's brains are rotted. So if you ever even mention the word fascism, people just lose their minds. I can't believe you'd be so hyperbolic. The left wing is so hyperbolic. They just call everyone they don't like a fascist, meanwhile calling every, gay person a groomer. And it's just you can't even begin to suggest, right? I'm very much of the sort of Mr. Girl or Destiny position where it's I don't think Trump's Adolf Hitler, but he's definitely got a fascist streak to him, no doubt, right? Yeah. There's just too many things here to say otherwise. But if you even try to give a nuanced thing like that, people hear the word fascism and their brains turn off.
Yeah, so I think maybe it is better to explain it without using the naughty word, but
yeah, it's sad, but yeah, I think it's unironically correct. It's I think I almost 100. sort of go. I don't know if you caught any of the sort of Destiny calling Nick a Nazi discourse, where people were arguing that Destiny has an obligation to call Nick a Nazi in conversations with Nick, and it's like, damn, I kind of agree with basically all these arguments. Like, he is a Nazi. Like, this word does have utility, but it's like, at the end of the day, people are just can't handle the word anymore. It's been ruined, so there's no point in using it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the middle ground is to talk about what does he have in common with Nazis or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think at the end of the day, you always should just go to describing the thing. You should say, like, Nick, said that it is akin to having sex with a dog to have sex with a black person. Like, I think you should just go to these. I think I'm paraphrasing there. I think there's actually some kind of nuance to that to not make it that bad. So I'll just put that disclaimer out now. But yeah, it's this thing that is really sort of puts me in a weird spot in my arguments where I disagree with a thing being something, right? So I might disagree with the idea that, like, it's important that the Little Mermaid is black. I don't really think that's that important. But then, because so many people, it almost feels like the argument becomes so proliferated that that people actually, it does start to become important to them. And then it's like, damn, like, I think you've been taken for a fool here, but, like, I guess I agree. I guess I have to agree now because like that it does follow. I mean, at the end of the day, we share this country and this planet with a bunch of other people. They're not going anywhere just because we disagree with them, So it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess anything could become important if the reaction to it is sufficiently important.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I feel the same way about some of these, like, xenogender stuff, where it's like, I really don't believe that, like, this is any that you identifying as a deer is real, and I don't think it's anything like being trans or anything like that. But damn, it feels like there could be a turning point where enough people are, like, legitimately emotionally, like, invested in this to the point where, like, constantly doing otherwise would be, like, really, like, a dick move to them and actually be, like, really, like, emotionally traumatizing. That it's like, I almost have to go along with it, but that's a really uncomfortable spot to be put in because it's like, where's the line then? Like, if people became sufficiently emotionally invested in a horrible thing, that was actually immoral, would I also, bend the knee there? I don't know. That's a really hard one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think that last thing you said has to be a hypothetical. I mean, people do get really emotionally invested into. Well, okay, I mean, we could go to religion if I just want to make the most inflammatory example possible, but also, like, patriotism and war and there's like there was that website you were showing me with, like, the NATO wave stuff, right? I mean,
r/NATO.
Yeah, so isn't that, like, an example of people just getting emotionally invested into something kind of horrible?
Yeah, I think the difference with sort of these social issues is that it's emotionally invested in such a way where you really have to almost be kind of a bully to a person. Not literally being a malicious bully, but, like, if someone really genuinely believes in xenogenders and you start being like, no, this isn't real, like, that's gonna really suck for them, right? Like, it's not like you're bullying them, right? Because ultimately you're just making a factual point or what you think is a factual point about this thing. But it is in such a way where it's like, damn, it feels really shitty, and it's over such a minor thing. If someone became like, well, I just really want to, do the Holocaust, it's like, okay, I don't give a fuck about your feelings in this instance. But when it's like referring to someone as the deer, it's like, damn, I kind of feel like it just feels kind of bad to be like, no, like talking to someone who's crying, be like, no, I will not call you this thing, and they're, like, legitimately in tears, even if those tears are hysterical and, like, are based in, like, foolishness.
Right, but on the other hand, it kind of, like, undercuts the public image of, or maybe I shouldn't even say public image, like transgender people pretty often have a problem with the xenogender thing, thinking that it, like, makes them look ridiculous. It appears like a parody of their identity, something like that. So there's, like, a danger on both sides, whether you validate it or not.
Yeah, you can sort of go into a sort of a reverse vacuum analysis and go like, well, it might seem like the only downside is for me to acknowledge this, but actually, the optical damage is going to hurt our political efficacy, which is going to lead to policies that actually hurt trans people. So you can sort of get there.
Said I did a phenomenal job. Most of them said that. In fact, people that would not be necessarily on my side said that. President Trump did a phenomenal job. We did. We got the gowns, we got the masks, we made the ventilators. You wouldn't have made ventilators, and now we're weeks away from a vaccine. We're doing therapeutics already. Fewer people are dying when they get sick.
I love that you wouldn't have made ventilators.
Great job.
Yeah, it's just like, It's just like that's the kind of moment where I want to be like, hold on, you seriously think that I would have done anything that I just would have been sitting there being like, we need to not be racist, and I would have done anything like, yeah, there's just no like good faith engagement at this level, and it's just really sad.
The only thing I haven't done a good job, and that's because of the fake news. No matter what you say to them, they give you bad press on it. It's just fake news. They give you good press, they give me bad press, because that's the way it is, unfortunately. But let me just tell you something. I don't care. I've gotten used to it. But I'll tell you, Joe, you could never have done the job that we did. You don't have it in your blood. You could have never done that job.
I know how to do the job. I know how to get the job
Well, you
done.
didn't do very well in swine flu. H1N1, you were a disaster. Your own.
All right, what? I'm not familiar with this line of argumentation, and I was very young at the time. I was just a little baby llama. But I'm pretty sure COVID's had a way worse effect on us than swine flu. And, like, that's probably a lot of that. In fact, most of that's probably due to the fact that swine flu is, like, a way less crazy disease than COVID is. But, bro, just on, like, the surface level, like, you can't be like, well, what about swine flu? When, like, half the country is, like, shut down at the time of this from COVID. Like, that just seems like such a horrible argument to make.
Yeah. So I just looked up the swine flu. The worldwide casualties were 284,000. So
What? Bro!
and this is so,
Understand.
yeah. I don't even know how much of that is in the United States, but obviously it's
It's gonna
like
be like 5.
no. I think
Because
it's
these things always destroy, like, well, it's gonna be really small because these things always end up destroying, like, third world countries, I think, a lot more. Unless that 200, well, yeah, that 200 worldwide. I mean, maybe it's all in America. I'd be surprised if it isn't, like, killing triple that, like, someplace in Central or South America or Africa, where some
uh,
poor people just don't have access to the proper healthcare infrastructure.
so I found it says we had over 50,000 confirmed cases, but let's see. Yeah, 277 children died, it says. I don't know. I'm having trouble finding like the total number of casualties, but
Yeah, well, it
it's like
definitely
it's not in
seems.
the same league as COVID, though.
Yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, and to be clear, that's definitely because of the disease, right? Like, it's not as if Trump had been office during the swine flu, it would have been as bad as COVID. But like, man, if you're just if we're not evaluating these arguments exclusively off of how much they actually make sense, we're talking, a big part of this is just making appealing arguments. I don't understand how that isn't just like how people listening to that aren't immediately like, bro, that's so stupid. Not to mention, if you actually wanted to make the argument, you would need to go into the evaluation of like what could have been prevented on like swine flu versus what happened, which is the same thing you need to go into COVID. But no one ever wants to do this. No one ever wants to look at like what would have happened if you had done a bad policy. It's just like bad outcome happened, even if it was the best of theoretical outcomes. That's a bad outcome, so we don't like you. Like no one ever wants to like talk about these. It's just way too nuanced of a discussion.
Yeah. Instead, it's you wouldn't have made ventilators. Is what
Yeah.
we get.
It's sort of a very similar thing to like the Afghanistan pullout, where it's like the Afghanistan pullout went bad. That's not the question. The question is, could it have gone better? And damn, that's a really hard thing to talk about when you look at like what a shit show Afghanistan was, even after we had spent 20 fucking years there. Which in some arguments, and I'm very sympathetic to this, kind of shows the fact that yeah, this was a lost project. If after 20 years we still couldn't get anything real.
Yeah, so I found some more numbers on the death tolls, and it varies a lot by region to region. But the highest death toll in a state was Florida, and that's let me see, what was it? 230 people in Florida died
Yeah,
of
so
swine
yeah,
flu.
not even close.
Yeah.
Own chief of staff said you were a disaster.
14,000 people died, not 200,000. There was
A
no
very-
economic recession.
Sir, you made a
There was-
far
there
less
was no
lethal
recession.
disease,
you made
by
a
the way.
point. Let him answer.
And there was no one. We didn't shut down the economy. This is his economy he shut down. The reason it's shut down is because, look, you folks at home, how many of you get up?
Just for context, Florida's death toll from COVID is about 80,500. So, just a casual, 50x.
Yeah.
This morning and had an empty chair at the kitchen table because someone died of COVID. How many of you were in a situation where you lost your mom or dad and you couldn't even speak to them? You had a nurse holding a phone up so you could, in fact, say goodbye.
You would have lost far
How
more
many
people.
people?
Far
That is-
more people.
And,
You would have been
and by the way,
months late.
your own
You were
his
months
his
behind me,
own his
Joe.
own CDC director says we could lose as many as another 200,000 people between now and the end of the year. And he held up. He said, if we just wear a mask, we can save half those numbers. Just the mask. And by the way, in terms of the whole notion of a vaccine, we're for a vaccine, but I don't trust him at all, nor do you. I know you don't. What we trust is a scientist.
You don't
we
trust
Dr.
Johnson
Fauci.
Johnson, Pfizer?
And
Okay,
by the way,
gentlemen, let me move on to questions about the future, because you both have touched on two of the questions I'm going to ask. Focusing on the future first, President Trump, you have repeatedly either contradicted or been at odds with some of your government's own top scientists. The week before last, the head of the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Redfield, said it would be summer before the vaccine would become generally available to the public. You said that he was confused and mistaken. Those were your two words.
Yeah.
But Dr. Slaoui, the head of your Operation Warp Speed, has said exactly the same thing. Are they both wrong?
Well, I've spoken to the companies, and we can have it a lot sooner. It's a very political thing because people like this would rather make it political than save lives. It is a very political thing. I've spoken to Pfizer. I've spoken to all of the
As
people
if that's
that
a
have to
choice
speak
that even
to. We have
makes
great
sense, right?
Moderna, Johnson and Johnson,
Yeah.
and others. They can go fast.
When it comes to making the political thing, it's like, it's so tragic that this argument is so mangled. Because, like, there's a real
Yeah.
thing to say, like, the politicization of, like, things that everyone should be united on, which I think Trump is really guilty of when it comes to, like, you know, like, respect for veterans. Like, God, another example of the double talk. Like, John McCain, I can't believe we got away with just shit-talking veteran prisoners of war who get captured by our enemies and refuse to be released ahead of other prisoners. Anyways, but because there's a real point, which is like you don't want these important things that everyone needs to be united on to be turned into political fights. But then when one side does turn into a political fight and you criticize them for doing that, that argument gets used against you. Oh, why are you making a response to COVID a political thing by attacking Trump? Because he made it a political thing. Because he's like not willing to do the things necessary because it's going to slow the economy down, which is going to hurt his election chances.
And the way that Trump put it was, you'd rather make it political than save lives. I'm trying to like think like what's even a charitable interpretation of that. It's like
Well, I
perhaps
think
he's
the idea is, and it's something was floated sort of during the election time, is that like Democratic politicians wanted the country to have as bad of a time with COVID because to hurt the incumbency, which was Trump at the time. So like I think there were a lot of comics of like I remember seeing a lot of like political comics of like a Democratic governor like purposely holding their head underwater and being like, we're all drowning, like to imply that like, you know, Democratic states are only doing so badly because they're intentionally doing so as a means to hurt Trump.
I see. Okay, so that would make sense if it's true, but he like didn't explain it in a way that I like
I mean, it
knew
would
what he was
make sense
talking
if,
about. Like,
yeah, I mean, it would make sense if we did like a bunch of work for them and be like, okay, well, if we charitably and steelman it this way and this way and that way, and they also have evidence, which they don't. Like, yeah, it's rough.
but it, like in its own way, I think it might be effective rhetoric, just because like for some reason, all you have to do is like accuse people of politicizing things, and it just comes across as an effective attack. Except for some reason, I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is a very effective attack, just because, not just of, I think in part because for a lot of people, you were sort of shielded from a lot of the impacts of COVID. There's still a lot of people who was like, yeah, I got sick and I was fine. It's no big deal. And there's like a whole legion of people out there that are like that. Not to mention other people that are, you know, incentivized financially to have these lockdowns end as quickly as possible, like small business owners, which then means there's going to be a bias in terms of them arriving to the conclusion that COVID's not a big deal, right? You know, if something's vastly in your favor, you know, you're more likely to believe that thing. And that's true of all of us. And there's a big chunk of people out there where it's in their favor for these lockdowns to be wrapped up, which sort of leads to which is supported by the idea that COVID isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah. So I, sorry to like, you know, divert away from what you were saying, but like, I guess what I had in my mind just now was I was thinking about how I think the entire concept of a democratic republic is that it implies that you're supposed to politicize things, right? It's like the whole idea is like, this is how we settle matters of controversy is through public discourse, and so I don't know. It's kind of like you're participating in an essential function of democracy, but they're using it as an accusation.
Yeah, I think what it gets at is that when people say political, it really has the connotation of like partisan or hackery, where it's like
Yeah.
being opposed to it just because it's the other side. Like when someone says, "Oh, you made it political," they mean like, "Oh, you're just disagreeing with this because it's the Republicans and you're a Democrat," and that's what they're really trying to get at. And the fact that the political has that connotation, I think, speaks volumes to where we're at in terms of like the public perception of politics and politicians and our institutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might say a lot, though, also about people's trust in the kind of foundations of democracy, too, right?
Yep.
If you were to believe that the way to settle matters of public controversy is through public discourse, then it wouldn't land as an effective attack. When you hear like you're politicizing this, whatever issue it is, like, this is the context that I'm thinking of where this comes up repeatedly is like there will be a school shooting, 20 people will get shot, and then and then you get people talking about gun control, and then the response to that is you're politicizing a tragedy or something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Like
people just
shouldn't
do
we?
not have the. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, it should be political, but what they mean is it shouldn't be like partisan hackery, and they
Yeah.
just are looking for an excuse to ignore arguments they don't like, and the fact that yeah, it's just people don't trust politicians, and it's not that you should trust politicians, but it's that you should have like a realistic evaluation of politicians, and people just have like the most like outlandish, like far-fetched, like, oh, what do you believe about politicians? Well, I believe that politicians, are self-interested, but a lot of that self-interest, is ultimately, going to manifest itself in terms of doing what their voters want, because that'll keep them elected. Wow, you're such a sheep. I can't believe you believe that. What do you believe about politicians? So every year they go to the Bohemian Grove and drink the blood of children. It's like, wow, true, Bay. It's like, oh my God, there needs to be like a middle ground to like this, where like we have like a realistic evaluation of politicians that doesn't end in like, some shit that Alex Jones talks about.
Well, and also that outlook on things would be pretty doomer because if it's true that
It is.
that it's the habit of powerful people to just engage in nefarious conspiracies, it's like what are we even supposed to do about it? That's not something that happens
Yeah.
by way of the design of our institutions.
Yeah.
Whereas the view that okay, they're self-interested, but we can make their self-interest align with our interests to some degree by designing our institutions accordingly.
Mhm.
Like it's
It's no coincidence that I think a lot of people on the far right and the far left end up in very similar positions about, oh, we need to tear it down. It can't be reformed, because a lot of these ideas stem from
yeah.
just sort of a central skepticism of our institutions that can oftentimes go so far as to not just being skeptical, but thinking they're irredeemable. And you're only like a couple pieces of logic from those concluding with like, yeah, we have to, there's nothing we can do but take up radical individual action. And I think it's one of the best criticisms you can make of, schizos, be they on the right or left, which is like, man, your worldview sets up, like, it's the thing that Lauren Southern talked about with Destiny, right? The conclusion of the worldview, almost one of the only conclusions is you have to take radical action yourself now.
Yeah, I was also thinking about the Lauren Southern thing because her line on this seemed to be like, well, I don't believe that violence is
Yeah,
the
but it's
way to
like,
respond to
why?
this stuff, and and seemed to not really acknowledge that she could be feeding into people who do, because then she would just say like, well, if people are that radical, they're just going to be violent anyway. There's nothing I. But it's the
Yeah, she never grappled. I feel like she never properly grappled, at least in the context of that debate. So that maybe she does another once. She never properly grappled with the fact that the conclusions of your principles and ideas are not what you believe. And just because you don't believe in them doesn't mean you get to abdicate yourself of responsibility. If I say, you know what, it's moral to kill babies, or if I say the world would be a better place if we all murdered babies, but I don't believe in murdering babies, that does not absolve me of responsibility for promoting the idea that we should kill all babies, because you're lending justification and ideas that when people hear are going to lead them to, not all of them, but certainly more than a non-zero amount to that idea. Like, the ultimate question is like, is it surprising that Lauren Southern's fans are more likely to believe that like we need to take radical individual violent action, as opposed to fans of like, I don't know, like Banging with Babish cooking show? Well, no, it's not really surprising because these ideas tend to promote that kind of thing, even if it's indirectly and unintentional.
And her type of rhetoric attracts a certain type of audience as well.
Yeah.
But there's this weird thing about this weird effect about having crazy beliefs, where sometimes if you get the right combination of crazy beliefs, they can sort of like cancel each other out. If it like so I'm trying to think, how do I explain this? Like, suppose I believed both that, one, it would be really good for lots of people to die of COVID, but then two, the best way to kill lots of people with COVID is for us to like social distance and wear masks, right? So it's like I've got two wrong beliefs that somehow lead me to a right conclusion, and so it's like then I could look at my belief system and go, well, I don't see what's wrong with either of those beliefs because like my belief system is, appears to like coincide with what we all want, and it's just harmless. But then it's like, but if I go around separately promoting those two beliefs, and some people are convinced by one of them but not the other, then you get.
It's also just this thing of people not caring about the process of how you come to a conclusion, where it's like, man, the way that you get to an idea is almost as important as the idea itself, because that's how you're going to get those ideas in the first place, right? It's like it's like the idea of teaching someone to fish rather than giving them a fish, right? It's like we should care more about how you're getting that fish than, oh, I got a big fish. Okay, but did you get it because you went down to the store and bought it? Or did you get it because you fish? But no one ever cares about that. And it just leads to these horrible worlds where like people just don't have a sound logic to evaluate things and to come to certain conclusions, and as a result there's just a plague of bad ideas.
Yeah, well, so I think like a lot of those kind of bad idea battlegrounds kind of form compelling media content because it's things that are easy to emotionally engage with, right? So there's a lot of like political issues where you can just say straightforwardly like this is how it affects trans people or whatever the thing is, right? But I think it's a lot harder to do that with like epistemology, but that doesn't really mean it's like less important. It's just like, well, I mean, I guess you just got to explain. It's like, well, the epistemology affects all those other things that you're emotionally engaged with, even though it's not emotionally engaging in and of itself, unless you're just like intellectually curious about it. Nevertheless, it's almost like take your medicine and to do some thinking about it, but that's like a I don't know, it feels like a shitty thing to say to people.
Yeah, there's this real problem, which is that you want to be able to acknowledge that there are some really dumb things in the world that are believed by a not insignificant amount of people. But you also don't want to go too far and be like, but I know everything, right? I am the smart one. God, I just was on a panel yesterday, the day before. No, it would have been the day before, on Monday, on Wick, where this guy was talking about how he thought it was okay to lie about certain things to advance his political agenda. To be fair to him, he was not talking about lying about things of substance. He was talking about like lying about like being a farmer, so as to then get the appeal of like, well, let me tell you here now, I'm a Nebraskan born and raised farmer, but then actually making real points, which to be fair is a big distinction from just lying about like actual things. Something he kept talking about that I kind of found myself agreeing with was like, listen, a lot of people are really stupid. And other panelists would push back, and I was like, okay, I think that's kind of true, but we still shouldn't lie because it's bad for us. And then, towards the end of the panel, and I don't want to be disrespectful here, because I am also everyone's stupid about something. In reality, everyone's stupid about many things. I'm very stupid things. He started making these horrible arguments. And I think I literally said the point, like, dude, you are now saying things that I would expect out of the dumb, stereotypical voters that you were disparaging in the first half. Where, like, you're saying, oh, I'm providing this explanation for why Joe Manchin is successful. If you disagree with that explanation, you need to advance your own explanation for why Joe Manchin is successful. It's like, no, you don't. I don't need to know how the International Space Station is able to maintain its orbit to tell you that it's not because the floating spaghetti monster is using his magic. Like, I don't need to offer my own explanation. And it's like, man, it's so difficult to try and acknowledge like the stupidity of like certain arguments and talk about how widespread it is without getting caught in your own echo chamber where you become blinded to your own stupidity, because you are stupid about many, many things. No one's not stupid about a bunch of shit.
I think the fact that nobody really escapes being stupid about a bunch of shit kind of implies that there isn't really a foolproof way to escape the problem entirely. I think the best you can do is just expose yourself to a lot of different ideas, try to take them seriously, try to try to engage with them critically, and I mean that's the
Yeah, and
best
it's
we can do.
yeah, and there's also this thing where it's like, man, I feel like I go through these like phases of my life, it's like a cycle where it's like I'll be like, everyone's stupid about something. There's varying levels of intelligence, but we're all they're the same. And then I'll talk to like a person, and I'll be like, okay, this is a bigger spread than I thought because it's like I don't want to be a dick, okay, and I
Yeah,
don't want to be
yeah.
mean, but like sometimes it really is like, oh my god, how are you a sentient human being? And like the scary thing is like I almost wonder if like it is true that some people are really 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 stupid, but you just shouldn't engage with that truth because it's going to lead you to become more stupid. Even if you are vastly smarter than that person, you still flawed, and you don't want to get trapped in that echo chamber. You should almost intentionally falsely downgrade your own opinion of yourself so as to prevent yourself from becoming too self-assured.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think like, is there a way to engage with it that's like good? I mean, I think there are ways to engage with it that are at least not super mean or condescending or whatever. But
Yeah.
but then you end up being kind of patronizing.
Yeah, the problem is the words are like, it's like what I want to say is like, you are not as intellectually, you have a lower intellectual capacity, but that is not grant moral weight, right? That's just like someone being better or worse at pottery. But it's like that is not how that is gonna come off. And in a way,
Right.
it's almost like, and in a way, it's almost like, damn, like I kind of agree that that is how that is not how it's going to come off. And in a way, I almost don't believe that myself. Because in a way, I am like, man, I do kind of really value like intellectual capacity.
Yeah, and if you're talking to somebody who's really engaged with the conversation, then I think there are kind of like nuanced ways to approach this. Like you can kind of do a little bit of Socratic dialogue with them and be like a little bit selective about about what you're asking. But yeah, most of
Yeah,
the
it's
time this is
just,
not going to work.
yeah, there's just, it doesn't feel like there's a good way to sort of broach the subject of like people being really dumb.
Yep.
Faster than that by a lot. Become very political because the left, or I don't know if I call
So
them
you're
left, I don't know
suggesting
what I
that
call
the
them.
head of your Operation Warp Speed, Dr.
I
Smiley?
disagree with him. Yeah, no, I disagree with both of them. And he didn't say that. He said it could be there, but it could also be much sooner. I had him in my office 2 days ago.
He talked
I
about
disagree with
summer
what he
service
said, but
force
also he
generally
didn't
available.
say it.
Yeah.
Just
He
like
said
Dr.
it's a
Redfield.
possibility that we'll have the answer before November 1st. It could also
I'm
be
talking about when
after
it's
that.
generally available. not when
Well,
it will
we're going to
be.
deliver it right away. We have the military all set up. Logistically, they're all set up. We have our military that delivers soldiers, and they can do 200,000 a day. They're going to be
This is
delivering
the
the
same man
It's
who
all
told
set
you
up.
by Easter this would be gone away. By the warm weather, it'd be gone. Miraculous, like a miracle. And by the way, maybe you could inject some bleach in your arm, and that would take care of it. This is the
That
same
was
man.
said sarcastically,
That was
and you
him.
know that.
I-
That was said sarcastically.
And so here's the deal. This man is talking about a vaccine. Every serious company is talking
Base
about
Trump
maybe having a vaccine done.
Base
by the
Trump
end of the year.
defending
The
edgy jokes,
distribution
by
of
the
that
way.
vaccine will not occur until
Yes,
sometime
bro, I was
beginning in the middle
joking.
of next year to get it out. If we get the vaccine, and pray God we will. Pray God we will.
Mr. Vice President, I want to pick up, though.
You'll have
on
the vaccine
I
sooner
want to
than
pick
that.
up on this question, though. You say the public can trust the scientists, but they can't trust President Trump. In fact, you said that again tonight. Your running mate, Senator Harris, goes further, saying the public health experts, quote, will be muzzled, will be suppressed. Given the fact that polls already show that people are concerned about the vaccine and are reluctant to take it, are you and your running mate, Senator Harris, contributing to that fear?
No more than the question you just asked him. You pointed out. He puts pressure and disagrees with his own scientists.
But you're saying you
Everybody
can't, or
knows.
Senator
And-
Harris is saying you
no,
can't trust the
No,
scientists.
well, no. You can trust the scientists. She didn't say that. You can't trust
She
the
said the public health
Did say
experts,
that.
quote, will be muzzled, will be
Yes.
suppressed.
Well, that's what he's going to try to do. But there's millions of scientists, there's thousands of scientists out there, like here at this great hospital, that don't work for him. Their job doesn't depend on him. That's not. They're the people. And by
I
the way,
spoke to the
and Fauci,
scientists that are in
by
charge.
the way,
They will have
and
the vaccine very soon.
does-
Let him finish.
Do you believe for a moment what he's telling you in light of all the lies he's told you about the whole issue relating to COVID? He still hasn't even acknowledged that he knew this was happening, knew how dangerous it was going to be back in February, and he didn't even tell you. He's on record as saying it. He panicked or he just looked at the stock market. One of the two, because guess what? A lot of people died, and a lot more are going to die unless he gets a lot smarter, a lot quicker.
Mr. President?
Did you use the word smart? So you said you went to Delaware State,
What?
but you forgot the name of your college. You didn't go to Delaware State. You graduated.
Oh, maybe Trump figured out the right way to
almost
engage
the
with
lowest
people
in your
being
class.
stupid.
Don't ever use the word smart with me. Don't ever use that word.
Oh, give me a break.
Because you know what? There's nothing smart about you, Joe. 47 years you've done nothing.
Let's have this debate.
And if
We'll
you
see
would have
this.
had, let me just tell you something, Joe.
No,
If you would have had the charge of what I was put through, I had to close the greatest economy in the history of our country. And by the way, now it's being built again.
See,
and
he's
it's
We're going to
going
get
up
to the
fast.
economy in the next segment, sir.
okay.
It's going up fast. I look
Okay.
forward to talking.
When it comes to how the virus has been handled so far, the two of you have taken very different approaches, and this is going to affect how the virus is handled going forward by whichever of you ends up becoming the next president. I want to quickly go through several of those. Reopenings. Vice President Biden, you have been much more reluctant than President Trump about reopening the economy and schools. Why, sir?
Because he doesn't have a plan. If I were running, I know what the plan is. You've got to provide these businesses the ability to have the money to be able to reopen with the PPE as well as with the sanitation they need. You have to
Tell
provide
that to
them
Nancy
plastic.
Pelosi.
Well, he's just shush for a minute.
Tell it to
See,
Nancy
no,
Pelosi. And Schumer,
by the
Brian
way,
Chuck.
Nancy Pelosi and Schumer, they have a plan. He won't even meet with them. The Republicans won't meet with him in the
Okay.
Senate.
But-
And he sits on his golf course. And, well, I mean, literally, think about it.
You probably
All right,
play
think
more than
about
I
it.
do, Joe.
What about this question of reopenings and the fact
Well, he wants to shut down this country, and I want to keep it open. And we
You
did a
get-
great
he
thing
just
by
admitted
shutting
he
it
shut
down.
it down.
Wait a minute,
Let
Joe.
him
Let me
finish,
shut
sir.
you down for a second, Joe, just for 1 second. He wants to shut down the country. We just went through it. We had to because we didn't know anything about the disease. Now we found that elderly people with heart problems and diabetes and different problems are very, very vulnerable. We learned a lot. Young children aren't. Even younger people aren't. We've learned a lot. But he wants to shut it down. More people will be hurt by continuing. If you look at Pennsylvania, if you look at certain states that have been shut down, they have Democrat governors all. One of the reasons they're shut down is because they want to keep it shut down until after the election on
yeah.
November
I want to
3rd.
move on to another
Because
subject.
it's a
I want to move
political
on to another
I
subject.
gotta
But
respond.
those,
I
but
wanna
those
move-
states,
gentlemen, I
those
wanna move
states
on to
are
another
not
subject.
doing well that are shut down
Which is
right
gotta
now.
now.
respond to that.
Wants
President
to shut
Trump,
down the
you
whole
have
country.
begun to increasingly question the effectiveness of masks as a disease preventer. And in fact, recently you have cited the issue of waiters touching their masks and touching plates. Are you questioning
No, I think
the
masks are
efficacy
okay.
of
You have
masks?
to understand, if you look, I mean, I have a mask right here. I put a mask on it, when I think I need it. Tonight, as an example, everybody's had a test, and you've had social distancing and all of the things that you have to. But I
Just
wear
like your
masks
rallies.
when needed. When needed, I wear masks.
Okay, let me ask.
I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen. I will say
Vice President Biden, go ahead, sir.
Look, the way to open businesses is give them the wherewithal to be able to open. We provided money. The
But
Congress.
I was asking you, sir, about masks.
Well, masks make a big difference. His own head of the CDC said if we just wore masks between now, everybody wore masks and social distance between now and January, we'd probably save up to 100,000 lives. It matters.
And they've also
It
said the
matters.
opposite. They've
And
also said
no serious person said the opposite.
They've
No
also said, well, look
serious.
all right, I
at
wanna
Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci said the
He
opposite.
did not
I
say
want to
the
ask you, we
opposite.
got a
said
little
very
bit more than a
strongly,
minute left in this
masks
segment.
are not good. Then he changed his mind. He said masks good.
I
I'm
wanna
okay
ask-
with masks.
I
I'm
want to
not
ask you
fighting
both about
masks.
one last subject because your different approaches has even affected the way that you have campaigned. President Trump, you're holding large rallies with crowds packed together, thousands of people.
Outside.
Outside, yes, sir, agreed. Vice President Biden, you are holding much smaller events with
Because nobody will show up.
people with
What's
Wait.
true? Nobody shows up to his rallies.
All right. In any case, why you holding the big rallies? Why you not? You go first, sir.
Because people want to hear what I have to say. I mean,
But are you
I've
not
done a
worried
great
about it
job
spreading
as a
disease?
president, and I'll have 25, 35,000 people show up at airports. We use airports.
Are you not worried
hangars,
about
we
the
have a
disease
lot of
issue,
people.
sir?
Well, so far we have had no problem whatsoever. It's outside. That's a big difference, according to the experts. We do them outside. We have tremendous crowds, as you see. I mean, and literally on 24 hours notice. And Joe does the circles and has 3 people someplace.
Okay.
By the way, did you see one of the last big rallies he had? And a reporter came up to him to ask him a question. He said, no, stand back. Put on your mask. Put on a mask. Have you been tested? I'm way far away from those other people. That's what he said. I'm going to be okay. He's not worried about you. He's not worried about the people out there breathing in one another.
We've had no negative effect.
No negative effect.
We've had no negative effect. And we've had 35, 40,000.
Trump himself did contract COVID at one point, if anybody will remember that.
I mean, yeah. Like, come on, if you're being honest with yourself, like, there's probably at least one person that's gotten COVID. Really no negative effects. Like, this is just so silly. Like, the real argument would be like, listen, I don't think that my events are uniquely contributing to COVID. I think our political engagement is an important process. And ultimately, I leave it up to Americans to judge the risks. If they want to personally come out and they accept that risk, then it's a free country. They're free to do so. But instead of just like, no one ever got sick in a Trump county. I mean, if your county was Trump positive, that means no COVID cases whatsoever.
It's just like one of those arguments is compatible with Trump's personality and the other one's not, is the problem.
Yeah.
Quickly finish up because I want to move on to our next.
Yes, I would. He's been totally irresponsible the way in which he has handled the social distancing and people wearing masks, basically encouraged them not to.
All right.
He's a fool on this.
If you could get the crowds, you would have done the same thing. But you can't. Nobody cares.
Gentlemen, can we move on to the
cares.
Gentlemen, can we move on to the economy?
Yes.
The economy is, I think it's fair to say, recovering faster than expected from the shutdown.
Much faster.
In the second quarter, the unemployment rate fell to 8.4% last month. The Federal Reserve says the hit to growth, which is going to be there, is not going to be nearly as big as they had expected. President Trump, you say we are in a V-shaped recovery. Vice President Biden, you say it's more of a K-shape. What difference does that mean to the American people in terms of the economy? President Trump, in this segment, you go first.
So we built the greatest economy in history. We closed it down because of the China plague. When the plague came in, we closed it down, which was very hard psychologically to do. He didn't think we should close it down, and he was wrong. And again, 2 million people would be dead now. Instead of still 204,000 people is too much. One person is too much. Should have never happened from China. But what happened is we closed it down, and now we're reopening, and we're doing record business. We had 10.4 million people in a 4-month period that we've put back into the workforce. That's a record the likes of which nobody's ever seen before. And he wants to close down he will shut it down again. He will destroy this country. You know, a lot of people, between drugs and alcohol and depression, when you start shutting it down, you take a look at what's happening at some of your Democrat-run states where they have these tough shutdowns. And I'm telling you, it's because they don't want to open it. One of them came out last week. You saw that. Oh, we're going to open up on November 9th. Why November 9th? Because it's after the election. They think they're hurting us by keeping them closed. They're hurting people. People know what to do. They can social distance. They can wash their hands. They can wear masks. They can do whatever they want. But they got to open these states up. When you look at North Carolina, and these governors are under siege, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and a couple of others, you got to open these states up. It's not fair. You're talking about it's like being in prison. And you look at what's going on with divorce, look at what's going on with alcoholism and drugs. It's a very, very sad thing. And he'll close down the whole country. This guy will close down the whole country and destroy our country. Our country
what the fuck even is this thing? Trump is saying he's like you wouldn't have closed it down and therefore a lot more people have died, but also you would have closed it down and destroyed the economy. It's like you're just going to have the worst of both worlds and do two contradictory things at the same time.
I think he's talking about shutting down travel between China and America. There's this common argument that is made by right-wingers, which was when Trump shut down travel between China and America, Biden said he shouldn't have done that because it was xenophobic. My understanding is that this is not true. What actually happened is that Biden criticized that when Trump did it, he kept that it was xenophobic in the way that he did it. That he kept calling it like the China virus. Like it was when Biden called Trump xenophobic, it was more a criticism of him constantly referring to it as the China virus, or like he just did now, the China plague. Even when we already knew it was, even after it was already designated as COVID-19. And so that's a conflation. So I think Trump's saying you wouldn't have shut down travel between China and America, and which was a good thing to shut down. And then you would shut down you would do lockdowns in America, which is a bad thing.
It sounded to me a minute ago like what Trump was saying was something like we built the greatest economy in history. We shut it down. It was very hard, and you wouldn't have done that. I thought that's what he was
Oh,
saying.
maybe. Yeah, actually, no, hold on. I think that actually is what he said, now that I think about it.
Sit down, and now we're reopening, and we're doing record business. We had 10.4
Than expected from the shutdown.
much faster.
In the second quarter, the unemployment rate fell to 8.4% last month. The Federal Reserve says the hit to growth, which is going to be there, is not going to be nearly as big as they had expected. President Trump, you say we are in a V-shaped recovery. Vice President Biden, you say it's more of a K-shape. What difference does that mean to the American people in terms of the economy? President Trump, in this segment, you go first.
So we built the greatest economy in history. We closed it down because of the China plague. When the plague came in, we closed it down, which was very hard psychologically to do. He didn't think we should close it down, and he was wrong. And again,
You know what? That's ambiguous, I guess, the way he said that.
Yeah.
I could interpret it either way.
204,000 people is too much. One person is too much. Should have never happened from China. But what happened is we closed it down, and now we're reopening, and we're doing record business. We had 10.4 million people in a 4-month period that we've put back into the workforce. That's a record the likes of which nobody's ever seen before. And he wants to close down he will shut it down again. He will destroy this country. You know, a lot of people, between drugs and alcohol and depression, when you start shutting it down, you take a look at what's happening at some of your Democrat-run states where they have these tough shutdowns. And I'm telling you, it's because they don't want to open it. One of them came out last week. You saw that. Oh, we're going to open up on November 9th. Why November 9th? Because it's after the election. They think they're hurting us by keeping them closed. They're hurting people. People know what to do. They can social distance. They can wash their hands. They can wear masks. They can do whatever they want. But they got to open these states up. When you look at North Carolina, and these governors are under siege, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and a couple of others, you got to open these states up. It's not fair. You're talking about it's like being in prison. And you look at what's going on with divorce, look at what's going on with alcoholism and drugs. It's a very, very sad thing. And he'll close down the whole country. This guy will close down the whole country and destroy our country. Our country is coming back incredibly well, setting records as it does it. We don't need somebody to come in and say, let's shut it down.
All right. Your 2 minutes, sir. We're now moved to you. As I said, posing the question, the president says it's a V-shaped recovery. You say it's a K-shaped recovery. What's the difference?
The difference is millionaires and billionaires like him in the middle of the COVID crisis have done very well. Billionaires have made another $300 billion because of his profligate tax proposal, and he only focused on the market. But you folks at home, you folks living in Scranton and Claymont and all the small towns and working class towns in America, how well are you doing? This guy paid a total of $750 in taxes.
Sir, wait, no. Sir, it's just yeah, I understand. You've agreed to the 2 minutes, so please let him have it.
Do I get my time back? The fact is that he has, in fact, worked on this in a way that he's going to be the first president of the United States to leave office having fewer jobs in his administration than when he became president. Fewer jobs than when he became president. First one in American history. Secondly, the people who have lost their jobs are those people who have been on the front lines, those people who have been saving our lives, those people who have been out there dying, people who've been putting themselves in a way to make sure that we could all try to make it. And the idea that he is insisting that we go forward and open when you have almost half the states in America with a significant increase in COVID deaths and COVID cases in the United States of America. And he wants to open it up more. Why does he want to open it up? Why doesn't he take care of the American? You can't fix the economy until you fix the COVID crisis. And he has no intention of doing anything about making it better for you all at home in terms of your health and your safety. Schools, why aren't schools open? Because it costs a lot of money to open them safely. You know, they were going to give, his administration was going to give the teachers and school students masks. And then they decided, no, couldn't do that because it's not a national emergency. Not a national emergency. They've done nothing to help small businesses. Nothing. They're closing. 1 in 6 is now gone. He ought to get on the job and take care of the needs of the American people so we can open safely.
All right. Your time is up, sir. We are going
It's just interesting how both sides are trying to sort of abdicate allegiance to billionaires and really rich people. I just think that's so funny in terms of the discourse and where American politics are at now, that both sides are trying to be like, no, they're in bed with the billionaires. No. They're in bed with the billionaires.
Yeah, I think this is kind of on the one hand, it's kind of worrying, right? Because it implies a sort of like conspiratorial thinking and like a us versus them mentality. But I think it explains a lot about the rise of Trump in the first place, in a way, because like even though he is a billionaire, he was perceived as being like kind of I don't even know what a class traitor maybe is the term or something. I don't know.
An outsider, yeah. I mean, he's definitely not an outsider. That's how he was perceived as. And yeah, it's just the establishment is just so unpopular right now with a lot of people. You know, being the anti-establishment is like the sexy new thing, right? It's like being, you know, pro Ron Paul back in the day, or like a Reddit atheist. It's just like the popular thing right now.
Yeah, and but this is like another.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
Sorry, yeah. This is another example of Trump kind of getting away with some doublespeak, right? Because he was somehow able to simultaneously market himself as like an outsider that was going to upend things, and then also also market himself as this very successful insider, like navigating within the system. And so, I mean, I guess those things aren't strictly contradictory, but it's like. I don't know, like
just belief.
Yeah, like in order to believe that those are not contradictory, you have to be like looking at it with a little bit of nuance, which is like really not a very Trumpian outlook on.
Yeah, like I remember there was some meme I saw when Trump's house got raided, and it was a headline of FBI raids Epstein-linked Clinton donor. And the joke is that Trump himself is an Epstein-linked Clinton donor, and just goes to show you, like, he is like an avatar of like the things that he and his supporters claim to rail against. And there's just and it's not like there was it's not even like there was a moment of contrition. It's not like Trump came out to start his campaign and said, I was part of the swamp and I saw it and I was revolted. No, like he's constantly bragging about how he's rich, he's a winner, he's got all these big businesses, you know. He doesn't own up to the fact like Trump University was like this giant scam, you know, robbing people of their money or anything like that. Yeah, it's just it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that was the Myopic Times who posted that meme. I saw that one as well.
Legendary meme.
to get to.
I have to respond to that.
Well, you both had 2 minutes, sir.
Excuse me, he made a statement.
So did you.
People want their schools open. They don't want to be shut down. They don't want their state shut down. They want their restaurants. I look at New York. It's so sad what's happening in New York. It's almost like a ghost town. And I'm not sure it can ever recover what they've done in New York. People want their places open. They want to get back to their lives. They'll be careful, but they want their schools open.
Okay.
I'm the one that brought back football. By the way, I brought back Big Ten football. It was me, and I'm very happy to do it. And
all right,
people of Ohio are very proud of me. And you know how I found out? When he took
gentlemen, we're going to get to your economic plans going forward in a moment. But first, Mr. President, as you well know, there's a new report that in 2016, the year you were elected president, and 2017, your first year as president, that you paid $750 a year in federal income tax each of those years. I know that you pay a lot of other taxes, but I'm asking you the specific question. Is it true that you paid $750 in federal income taxes each of those 2 years?
I paid millions of dollars in taxes, millions of dollars of income tax. And let me just tell you, there was a story in one of the papers. I paid $38 million one year. I paid $27 million.
Show us your tax
one year.
returns.
I went. You'll see it as soon as it's finished. You'll see it. You know, if you want to do, go to the Board of Elections. There's a 118-page or so report that says everything I have, every bank I have, I'm totally under leveraged because the assets are extremely good, and we have a very, I built
Sir,
a great
I'm asking
company.
you a specific question, which
But
is...
let me tell you.
I understand all of that.
Release your
I
tax
understand
return.
all of that.
But let me-
No, Mr. President.
Go ahead.
I'm asking you a question. Will you tell us how much you paid in federal income taxes in 2016 and 2017?
Millions of dollars.
You paid millions of dollars?
Millions of dollars.
So
yes.
not 750?
Millions of dollars, and you'll get to see it. And you'll get to
When?
see it. But let me just
Inshallah?
tell you.
He's
let me
been
just say
saying since
something.
2015 that
It
we'd
was the
get to
tax
see it
laws.
eventually.
I don't want to pay tax. Before I came here, I was a private developer. I was a private business people. Like every other private person, unless they're stupid, they go through the laws, and that's what it is. He passed a tax bill that gave us all these privileges for depreciation and for tax credits. We build a building and we get tax credits like the hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue. You get a massive, which, by the way, was given to me by the Obama administration, if you can believe that. Now, the man got fired right after that happened. But
Vice President Biden, you want to respond?
Yeah, I do want to respond. Look, the tax code that made him, put him in a position that he pays less tax than a school teacher on the money a school teacher makes is because of him he says he's smart because he can take advantage of the tax code. And he does take advantage of the tax code. That's why I'm going to eliminate the Trump tax cuts. And I'm going to eliminate those tax cuts and make sure that we invest in the people who, in fact, need the help. People out there need help.
But why didn't you do it over the last 25 years?
Because you weren't
Why didn't you do it over?
because
why
you
didn't
weren't
do it over
president
the
screwing
last
things
20
up.
You were a senator. And
You're
by
the
way,
worst
you were a
president
vice-
America has ever had.
Hey,
Come
Joe,
on.
let me just tell you, Joe. I've done more in 47 months. I've done more than you've done in 47 years, Joe. We've done things that you never even thought of doing, including
Gentlemen,
fixing the broken military that you gave me, including taking care of your vets.
Mr. President, we're talking about the economy. I'd like to ask you about your plans going forward because, Mr. Vice President, your economic plan, if you were to be elected president, focuses a lot on big government, big taxes, big spending. I want to focus first on the taxes. You propose more than $4 trillion over a decade in new taxes on individuals making more than $400,000 a year and on corporations. President Trump says that kind of an increase in taxes is going to hurt the economy as it's just coming out of a recession.
Well, just take a look at what as the analysis done by Wall Street firms points out that my economic plan would create 7 million more jobs than his in 4 years, number one. And number two, it would create an additional $1 trillion in economic growth because it would be about buying American. That we're going to make this federal government spend $600 billion a year on everything from ships to steel to buildings and the like. And under my proposal, we're going to make sure that every penny of that has to be made by a company.
But respectfully, sir, I'm talking about taxes, not spending.
By the way, I'm going to eliminate a significant number of the tax. I'm going to make the corporate tax 28%. It shouldn't be 21%. You have 91 companies, in the Fortune 500 who don't pay a single penny in tax, making billions of dollars.
Why didn't you do it
Billions
before
of
when
dollars.
you were vice president with Obama?
Because you, in fact, passed that. That was
Right.
your
I got
tax
it.
proposal.
I got it done. And you know what happened?
Yeah, you got it done.
Our economy boomed
And,
like it's never boomed.
The economy is
Mr.
busted.
President,
Let me finish.
Mr. President, let me pick up on that. You would continue your free market approach, lower taxes, more deregulation, correct?
Not lower taxes for American people.
But in Obama's, you talk about the economy booming. It turns out that in Obama's final 3 years as president, more jobs were created, 1.5 million more jobs than in the first 3 years of your presidency.
They had the slowest recovery economic recovery since 1929. It was the slowest recovery. Also, they took over something that was down here. All you had to do is turn on the lights and you pick up a lot. But they had the slowest economic recovery.
Wait, is it super easy to recover, or was it a horrible recovery? That seems like a little contradictory.
I think what he's implying is like it was so easy that any idiot should have been able to do it, but you guys are so incompetent that you couldn't even pull off this super
Oh,
easy
yeah,
thing. Like
okay, yeah, okay, yeah, I think that's what I say.
Recovery since 1929. Let me tell you about the stock market. When the stock market goes up, that means jobs. It also means 401ks. If you got in, if you ever became president with your ideas, you want to terminate my taxes, I'll tell you what, you'll lose half of the companies that have poured in here will leave, and plenty of companies that are already here, they'll leave for other places. They will leave, and you will have a depression, the likes of which you've never seen.
Look,
Mr.
we
Vice President.
inherited the worst recession short of a depression in American history. I was asked to bring it back. We were able to have an economic recovery that created the jobs you're talking about. We handed him a booming economy. He blew it.
It wasn't
He blew it.
booming.
He blew it.
It wasn't booming. It was the weakest recovery
Well, sir, is it
since
fair to, wait, is it fair to say he blew it when fact there was
COVID came.
when there was record low unemployment before COVID?
Yeah, but because what he did, even before COVID, manufacturing went in the hole. Manufacturing went in the hole.
Excuse
number
me,
one.
Chris. Wait.
Number two.
Chris.
Number three.
They said it would take. No, you're number two.
No.
Chris. They said it would take a miracle to bring back manufacturing. I brought back 700,000 jobs. They brought back nothing. They gave up on manufacturing. Part of my standard fare.
I'm the guy that brought
totally
back
gave
the
up on
automobile industry.
manufacturing.
All right, let him.
We brought back, I was asked to bring back Chrysler and General Motors. We brought them back right here in the state of Ohio and Michigan. He blew it.
This is the documentary we watched a couple months ago.
Ohio had the best year it's ever had last year. Michigan had the best year they've ever had.
That is not
Many
true.
car companies came in from Germany, from Japan, went to Michigan, went to Ohio.
They're not having it.
And they didn't come in with you.
Mr. Vice President, go ahead.
And so you take a look at what he's actually done. He's done very little. His trade deals are the same way. He talks about these great trade deals. You know, he talks about the art of the deal. China's perfected the art of the steal. We have a higher deficit with China now than we did before. We have the highest trade deficit
China
with
ate
Mexico.
your lunch, down
All right, gentlemen,
18%. China ate your lunch, Joe. And no wonder your son goes in and he takes out billions of dollars, to manage. He makes millions of dollars. And also,
Simply
while we're
not
at it,
true.
why is it, just out of curiosity, the mayor of Moscow's wife gave your son $3.5 million. What did he do to deserve it? What did he do with Burisma to deserve $183,000?
None of that is true.
Let him answer.
None of that is true.
Oh, really? He didn't get
But no,
$3.5 million?
Mr. President,
It's
Mr.
totally-
President, please.
Totally
ask the question.
discredited. Totally discredited. And by the way,
Well, wait, he
let's
didn't get
talk-
$3.5 million, Joe?
Mr. Vice,
He got
Mr.
$3.5 million.
President,
It is not true.
Oh, really?
Mr. President,
but, Mr.
it's an open discussion, please.
Now,
It's a fact.
Well,
It
you
is
have
not.
raised an issue. Let the
been
Vice
totally
President answer.
discredited.
Did
There was a
Burisma pay him
report.
$183,000 a month with no experience in energy?
Mr.
Look,
President,
my son did nothing wrong at Burisma.
I think he did.
and
Mr.
the only
President,
guy that
let
did
him
something-
answer.
He doesn't want to let me answer because he knows I have the truth. His position has been totally, thoroughly discredited.
By who?
And
The media?
By everybody. Well, by the
By the
media,
media,
by our
because they refuse to
allies, by
talk
the
about it
World
because they're
Bank,
embarrassed.
by everyone has discredited. Matter of fact, even
Mr.
the people
President,
who
please stop.
testified under oath.
So let me
Under
ask you
oath.
this,
Every-
Joe.
under
No,
oath.
go ahead, Mr. I'm listening to
Even the
you.
people under,
He got $3.5
he
million from
testified-
Moscow.
He testified under oath in his administration, said, I did my job and I did it very well.
Oh,
I
really?
did it
I'd like to
honorably.
know who they are.
Well, I'll give you the list
I'll
of the
fire
people who
them.
testified.
No, go ahead, sir.
Sure, you've already fired most of them because they did a good
Because
job.
Some people don't
Well,
do a good
here's
job. With you,
Go
they
ahead.
say-
You get
here's the
wait a
deal.
minute. You get the final word, Mr.
Well, it's hard to get any word in with this clown. Excuse me, this.
Hey,
this
let me
person.
just tell you,
No. I'm Mr. President. I'm
$3.5
Mr.
million,
President.
Joe.
That is simply
Why did he
not true.
deserve $3.5 million
It
from
did-
Moscow?
Look, here's the deal. We want to talk about families and ethics. I don't want to do that. I mean, his family we could talk about all night. His family's
My
already...
family,
No, let him go.
my
Let-
family
already
lost
wrote.
a fortune by
Go ahead.
coming down and helping
Go
us
ahead.
with
Go ahead,
government.
sir.
And that's
Every-
such a...
and they're right
That's
here.
it, Mr.
That's
President.
such
Every
a great...
single one of them lost
This
a
is not
fortune
about
by
President.
my
coming and
family or
helping
his
us
family.
with
It's
government.
about your family,
They
the
didn't
American
collect
people.
$3.5 million.
He doesn't... That's not true. It doesn't want to talk about what you need. You, the American people. It's about you. That's what we're talking about
you
here.
should-
All right, that's
Not
the,
about
end
here.
of, that's the end of the
Shouldn't have
segment.
taken them.
We're moving on.
It didn't take them.
Well,
Vice
it's a
President,
but Chris,
no,
can I be honest? It's a very important
Try to be
question.
honest.
No,
That's
I
a good
stood
thing.
up.
No,
He stood up,
the answer to
and
the
he
question is
threatened
no.
Ukraine
No,
with $1
sir.
billion
Sir,
if you
That
don't get rid of
is
the Trump.
you know what, you're-
absolutely not
stop.
You're on
true.
tape
You're-
doing it.
you're gonna
You're on
have-
tape.
True.
Gentlemen, I hate to raise
Chris,
my voice,
he's
but I
on
see it seems
tape.
to be. Why
Pr-
should I
Prime
be
would
for the
mute him.
two of you? So here's
Yeah.
the
Point.
We have 6 segments. We have ended that segment. We're going to go to the next segment. In that segment, you each are going to have 2 uninterrupted moments. In those 2 uninterrupted minutes, Mr. President, you can say anything you want. I'm going to ask a question about race, but if you want to answer about something else, go ahead. But I think that the country would be better served if we allowed both people to speak with fewer interruptions. I'm appealing to you, sir, to do that.
Well, and him too.
Well, frankly, you've been doing more interrupting
Well, that's
than
all
he
right,
has.
but he does plenty.
Well, less than, sir, less
there's
than,
plenty.
no, less than you have. Let's please continue on. The issue of race. Vice President Biden, you say that President
Before they go dive into this next sort of dialogue, man, it doesn't seem like there's much strategy on the surface in terms of either their approaching and sort of either of their approaches. And I wonder if there is like an actual strategy behind the scenes to just sort of not have almost. I wonder if the strategy is to come off as not having a strategy, as to just sort of almost handling it more as a casual conversation. Because it really feels like Trump almost, it doesn't feel. Trump consistently does this thing, and I wonder if it is intentional. Where it just sort of always blows up into sort of just almost these like snipes back and forth. And sort of gish galloping to sort of different points in different that are only sort of tangentially related, where like they'll be on like the subject of like the Supreme Court, and then somehow I've gotten like all the way over to like COVID stuff, and then they'll transition to the COVID question, and so just this running like it's almost like this running collapse, like this running train wreck.
Yeah, my suspicion is that it's both intentional and that that's what his personality is just normally like. So it would like require effort for him to suppress that, but he doesn't want to because it's like he sees it as advantageous and he just has no impulse control on top of it.
Yeah, I think it's quite an effective strategy. I think this is a really great case study in why sometimes you really need to pin someone down and not let them keep going, because otherwise they'll just sort of touch on a very surface level. They'll touch on a very surface level on multiple different points, and that surface level will always be a good look for them. And if you could ever dive in, it obviously is more complicated on all of these subjects to the point where, or not just complicated to a certain point, but complicated in such a way that's not going to be very beneficial to them, right? Like when Trump talks about like the Ukraine stuff with Hunter Biden, that stuff is absolutely not what he's giving it off as. But if he can hit on that soundbite, and people who know that sort of been like, oh yeah, that's right, and then just move on, there's a real advantage to be able to do that over and over and over again.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is like a best case scenario for presidential debates, right? Where they get whatever they said actually gets subjected to scrutiny in a way that it normally wouldn't be in other settings, besides like maybe a really tough interview. But
yeah, I was just going to say, and something that I have had personal experience with when it comes to trying to pin someone down and something that you could really fall for, is always wanting to counter them on the most recent thing they say. So he'll say something, let's say on like COVID, you'll say, oh, well, that's not true. And he'll be like, well, it is true. And here's the thing about Ukraine. He'll be like, well, hold on, that's not true about Ukraine. And then you never actually go back to COVID and dive into that. So you really need to resist the urge, right? When he says 3 things that are untrue, when he says something that's untrue, and respond to that, and he responds by saying something untrue about a different subject, you have to go and be like, hold on, let's not run away from the COVID discussion that you were incorrect about. You said this, and you were wrong for this. Like, that's what you really got to do. And it's so unbelievably hard to do that in the middle of a conversation. Keeping your head on a swivel and understanding from a bird's eye view where this conversation is going while you're simultaneously taking part of it is really difficult. I don't think anyone can do it perfectly.
Yeah, and in order to do it, you have to kind of like sink to his level in some way. You have to like get really combative and be interrupting him and stuff. And then at that point, you kind of lose a little bit of that contrast where it's like this guy's being a clown, he's acting like a little kid, and he just never shuts up. But if he's doing that constantly, like how else are you supposed to get a word in edgewise but to do a little bit of the same thing?
Yep.
Trump's response to the violence in Charlottesville 3 years ago, when he talked about very fine people on both sides, was what directly led you to launch this run for president.
Oh, yeah, sure.
President Trump, you have often said that you believe you have done more for black Americans than any president, with the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln. My question for the two of you is, why should voters trust you rather than your opponent to deal with the race issues facing this country over the next 4 years? Vice President Biden, you go first.
It's about equity and equality. It's about decency. It's about the Constitution. And we have never walked away from trying to require equity for everyone, equality for the whole of America. But we've never accomplished it. But we've never walked away from it like he has done. It is true. The reason I got in the race is when those people, close your eyes, remember what those people look like coming out of the fields carrying torches, their veins bulging, just spewing anti-Semitic bile, and accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan. A young woman got killed. And they asked the president what he thought. He said there were very fine people on both sides. No president's ever said anything like that.
It is who's
now, second point I'd make to you is that when Floyd was killed, when Mr. Floyd was killed, there was a peaceful protest in front of the White House. What did he do? He came out of his bunker, had the military use tear gas on him so he could walk across to a church and hold up a Bible. And then what happened after that? The bishop of that very church said that it was a disgrace. The general who was with him said all he ever wants to do is divide people, not unite people at all. This is a president who has used everything as a dog whistle to try to generate racist hatred, racist division. This is a man who, in fact, you talk about helping African Americans. 1 in 1,000 African Americans has been killed because of the coronavirus. And if he doesn't do something quickly, by the end of the year, 1 in 500 will have been killed. 1 in 500 African Americans. This man is the savior of African Americans. This man cares at all. This man's done virtually nothing. Look, the fact is that you have to look at what he talks about. You have to look at what he did. And what he did has been disastrous for the African American community.
So, President Trump, you have 2 minutes. Why should Americans trust you over your opponent to deal with racism?
You did a crime bill, 1994, where you called them super predators, African Americans, the super predators, and they've never forgotten it. They've never forgotten it, Joe.
No, sir, it's his 2 minutes.
So you did that, and they called you super predator, and I'm letting people out of jail now that you have treated the African American population community, you have treated the black community about as bad as anybody in this country. You did the and that's why, if you look at the polls, I'm doing better than any Republican has done in a long time, because they saw what you did. You call them super predators, and you've called them worse than that, because you look back at your testimony over the years, you've called them a lot worse than that. As far as the church is concerned, and as far as the generals are concerned, we just got the support of 250 military leaders and generals, total support. Law enforcement, almost every law enforcement group in the United States. I have Florida, I have Texas, I have Ohio, I have Portland. The sheriff just came out today and he said, I support President Trump. I don't think you have any law enforcement. You can't even say the word law enforcement, because if you say those words, you're going to lose all of your radical left supporters. And why aren't you saying those words, Joe? Why don't you say the words law enforcement? Because, you know what? If they called us in Portland, we would put out that fire in a half an hour, but they won't do it because they're run by radical left Democrats. If you look at Chicago, if you look at any place you want to look, Seattle, they heard we were coming in the following day and they put up their hands and we got back Seattle. Minneapolis, we got it back, Joe, because we believe in law and order, but you don't. The top 10 cities and just about the top 40 cities are run by Democrats and in many cases radical left. And they've got you wrapped around their finger, Joe, to a point where you don't want to say anything about law and order. And I'll tell you what, the people of this country want and demand law and order, and you're afraid to even say it.
All right. I want to return to the question of race. Vice President Biden, after the grand
the super predator thing was a Hillary Clinton quote, by the way. It wasn't Biden.
Yeah, it's funny. Trump sort of invoking the crime bill, which is very typically a sort of lefty argument made against Biden, is really funny. Um, I personally don't agree with that argument whatsoever. But I think the more interesting thing is how often in this debate Trump has sort of tried to make allusions either to the more radical left or explicitly make their arguments. Where it feels like he's simultaneously trying to sort of be the pressure on both sides, where he's
Yeah,
making the left-leaning argument against Trump or against Biden about the crime bill and how that was horribly racist. But then he's also talking about how and you're beholden to the radical left. It's almost like
yeah,
he's trying to like do the pincer himself.
yeah. It's like he's scaremongering about them, but also pandering to them. It's super weird. Yeah,
Charge any of the police with homicide. You said it raises the question, quote, whether justice could be equally applied in America. Do you believe that there is a separate but unequal system of justice for blacks in this country?
Yes, there is. There's systemic injustice in this country, in education and work and in law enforcement and the way in which it's enforced. But look, the vast majority of police officers are good, decent, honorable men and women. They risk their lives every day to take care of us. But there are some bad apples. And when they occur, when they find them, they have to be sorted out. They have to be held accountable. They have to be held accountable. And what I'm going to do as President of the United States is call together an entire group of people at the White House, well, everything from the civil rights groups to the police officers, to the police chiefs, and we're going to work this out. We're going to work this out so we change the way in which we have more transparency in when these things happen. These cops aren't happy to see what happened to George Floyd. These cops aren't happy to see what happened to Breonna Taylor. Most don't like it, but we have to have a system where people are held accountable. And by the way, violence in response is never appropriate. Never appropriate. Peaceful protest is. Violence is never appropriate.
All right.
What is peaceful protest? When they run through the middle of the town and burn down your stores and kill people all over the place, and you say peaceful protest?
President Trump,
No, it's
I'm not
not, but
asking-
you say it is.
President Trump, I'd like to continue with the
Yes,
issue
go
of
ahead,
race. I
please.
promise we're going to get to the issue of law and order in a moment. This month, your administration directed federal agencies to end racial sensitivity training that addresses white privilege or critical race theory. Why did you decide to do that, to end racial sensitivity training? And do you believe that there is systemic racism in this country, sir?
I ended it because it's racist. I ended it because a lot of people were complaining that they were asked to do things that were absolutely insane, that it was a radical revolution that was taking place in our military, in our schools, all over the place, and you know it, and so does everybody
what
else.
is radical,
and he would know.
What is
Oh, it
radical
was totally
about
racist.
racial sensitivity training, sir?
If you were a certain person, you had no status in life. It was sort of a reversal. And if you look at the people, we were paying people hundreds of thousands of dollars to teach very bad ideas and frankly very sick ideas. And really, they were teaching people to hate our country. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to allow that to happen. We have to go back to the core values of this country. They were teaching people that our country is a horrible place, it's a racist place, and they were teaching people to hate our country. And I'm not going to allow that to happen.
Vice President Biden?
Nobody's doing that. He's
Oh,
the
you-
racist.
You just don't.
Here's the deal. I know a lot more about
You
this
don't
than he
know.
does.
Let him finish.
The fact is that there is racial insensitivity. People have to be made aware of what other people feel like, what insults them, what is demeaning to them. It's important to people know they don't want to. Many people don't want to hurt other people's feelings, but it makes a big difference. It makes a gigantic difference in the way a child is able to grow up and have a sense of self-esteem. It's a little bit like how this guy and his friends look down on so many people. They look down their nose on people like Irish Catholics like me and grew up in Scranton. They look down on people who don't have money. They look down on people who are of a different faith. They look down on people who are a different color. In fact, we're all Americans. The only way we're going to bring this country together is bring everybody together. There's nothing we cannot do if we do it together. We can take this on and we can defeat racism in America.
President Trump, sir.
During the Obama-Biden administration, there was tremendous division. There was hatred. You look at Ferguson, you look at
I think this is the kind of argument that left-leaning people just need to stop making. I'm gonna be honest here, guys. Like, sensitivity training and stuff like this is just a horrible optical look. There are good ways to teach about racism and stuff like that, but these like mandated sensitivity trainings, I don't think are ever going to like come off optically well. And particularly when you're like the Democratic nominee for president, just say, yeah, that stuff's dumb. I don't support that.
It's really hard to thread that needle though, right? Because I think like it's probably true that most people have a negative opinion about sensitivity training. In fact, a lot of people have probably had negative personal experiences with having to go through it, and it comes across as really dumb if you do that at school or work. But on the other hand, like he doesn't want to do it in a way that's going to suggest that that the problems that it's trying to address aren't real.
Yeah, I think what you want to say is something along the lines of, look, racism is very complicated. It's easy for us to look at racism at someone, screaming the N-word and say that's wrong. But it's harder for us to understand exactly the ways in which, your parents being discriminated against affects your quality of life. Sensitivity training, I don't think, is the right way to go about this. We shouldn't be berating people for being subconsciously racist. I don't even think that exists. But I do think there is something we can do in terms of teaching the other side of the story when it comes to racial discrimination. Not just the overt stuff, but the more subtle and insidious stuff.
Yeah, I think the sensitivity training, if it has any merit at all, like then the idea would just be like it might help you to communicate in a more diplomatic way about about these kind of topics, but it isn't actually going to genuinely increase your sensitivity or understanding of them.
Yeah.
You go to very many places. Look at Oakland. Look what happened in Oakland. Look what happened in Baltimore. Look what happened. Frankly, it was more violent than what I'm even seeing now.
Oh, my
but the
Lord.
reason
This
is
is
that
ridiculous.
the Democrats that run these
Absolutely
cities
ridiculous.
don't want to talk like you about law and order.
Violent
and you
crime,
still haven't mentioned.
violent
Are you in
crime.
favor of law and order?
I'm in favor of law. You follow
Are you in
it, and a little
favor
bit
of law and order? Go
Yes,
ahead,
I'm
say
in
it.
favor.
You
Everybody's
asked a
in favor
question,
of
let him finish.
Law
He
and order.
loses
Law and
Let
order.
him, let him
Law and order with justice, where people get treated fairly. And the fact of the matter is, violent crime went down 17%, 15% in our administration.
All right.
It's gone up on his watch.
Went down much more
he
in
had,
ours.
All right, we're
He
now.
is president of
Mr.
the
President,
United
you're going
States
to.
of America.
We
Mr.
were
President,
breaking every record in the
Mr.
book.
President, you're going to be very happy because
And
we're now going to talk about law and order.
Places we had trouble were Democratic-run cities.
That's exactly my question. There has been a
Can we
dramatic
pause for a
increase
second?
in homicides.
I got a question from chat. It was Myopic Times is asking, like, do you think that subconscious racism exists or doesn't exist?
I think that subconscious racism, I think that there is a phenomena that when people describe subconscious racism, I think they're describing anything that's real, but I reject the framing of calling it subconscious racism. I think that racism needs to be something that is explicit in order for it to be something that's wrong. I'm uncomfortable with the idea of something of racism, of subconscious racism, because that would imply that it's not wrong. Because I don't think you can ever hold someone responsible for something they're doing subconsciously. I think that is sort of a weird double bind. And I think that optically, there's just so much better ways to go about it. I think you can talk about, for example, like biases, right? Like, is it any wonder, like when you were in school, that like most friend groups tend to be divided along race if you grew up in like a school that had lots of different ethnic groups, or an even more common one, the idea that like male friend groups and female friend groups are much more common than a friend group that is equally male and female. I think that it's a lot more fruitful to talk about that than to say subconscious racism, because I think that word is just lost.
I'm trying to think, like, I have a position that I think is like kind of close to yours, but because like I think we agree that it's a real thing, and we agree that it has bad consequences, and we probably also agree that there's certain ways of communicating about it that moralize it in a way that we don't want to, because it isn't. I don't think it's like morally wrong to hold subconsciously racist beliefs or any other like subconscious beliefs, in that it's not really a choice that anyone's making to have those, but I think it's good for people to be aware of them if those things have consequences that we want to put moral weight on. I don't know. Like, what do you think
I
is
would
a better
say
way to communicate that?
I think just talking about biases that aren't that you don't like think about, because I think subconscious. I think the problem is both subconscious or unconscious and racism. Because when you talk about racism, you're not talking about something that's just bad, but something that's wrong. I think that's the difference. I would totally agree that these unconscious biases have a bad outcome, but I feel like racism, or I guess, well, if the word can still be saved. I feel like racism is bad because it has a certain moral loading to the badness of it that has to do with you're a bad person for doing it, right? Racism is not like having cancer, right? Having cancer is bad, right? But you're not a bad person for it. Racism, I think, is something different. It's like a sin, right? It's not a bad thing. It is like a sin that you've committed. And pairing it with subconscious, I think, is just like a fundamental like breakdown of how those words function for most people, right? Like if you sit someone down and actually explain it out, you'll be able to get a much better response than though using the word, which I think is an indication that it's a bad use of the word.
So you'd rather have us talk about like subconscious biases, and then like just talk around the word racism to avoid the like moral loading of the word. Is that what it is?
I mean, sort of. I mostly yes, but I would signpost a legitimate defense, in my opinion, of not using that word, of that being a bad use of the word. It's not just that that word makes people's brains turn off, like because they're stupid. I think there is a real argument, independent of that, against using that word in that way, based off of the shared meaning that it sort of has. I don't think it makes sense to say that you can be subconsciously racist.
Yeah, I think that last part I disagree with. I think it's just literally true that people are can be subconsciously racist. I just I don't know. Maybe it's a weird thing to say because the like I don't want to say that it's morally bad for people to have beliefs that they're not even aware that they have, right, or having biases. Like it's morally bad in the sense that it's going to be associated with decisions that I think are morally bad, but it's not
Hmm.
morally bad in that, if you're just on an island by yourself having unconscious racial biases, like obviously nobody's hurt by that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I would just the way I would put it is that I feel like the word racism evokes certain things that are inappropriate to be paired with like subconscious racism. I think it's why I would also disagree with like when someone uses the word fascist, like if someone says, Donald Trump is a fascist, it's like, oh, okay. But if someone says, oh, I think that, Tucker Carlson is a or not even Tucker Carlson, so probably a good Tucker Carlson as well. But if they said some hypothetical figure was a fascist, and the justification was like, well, they don't like the media, and they're like trying to like obscure open debate, right? Like the Nazis never did that, right? And they have like Schrodinger's like Jew, right? They have an enemy that they think is very powerful but also very weak at the same time. Um, I think I would really push back against that because when you say fascism, you're invoking like Nazis, and so I think there needs to be something more equivalent to that, or else the word is going to become degraded to the point where it doesn't mean anything, like Nazi does as well, right? In a similar way, if you said, "Oh, I think this person is kind of like Adolf Hitler," they're kind of like Hitler, you need to be drawing some connection to the Holocaust, right? Because saying that, like, "Oh, well, Hitler, broke international norms and invaded weaker countries, so Putin is kind of like Hitler." No, when you say Hitler, you're invoking the Holocaust, and I think it's inappropriate to then try and sort of twist those words in a way where it's like, yes, in a very technical senses, but I don't think that's what the shared meaning in our society is. And I think as a result, there's a weird degrading of that word. And I think this is kind of what's happened towards like racism or fascism, is that they've been twisted in these ways where I don't think I necessarily agree with the technical. I don't think they're technically wrong, but it seems against the spirit of how that word is used, and as a result, there's a mismatch there, and people end up dropping it.
Okay, so I agree with you on the point that it can be like rhetorically ineffective or bad, that because these words have certain associations with them that you may not be meaning to invoke when you use them. I think I also agree with you that it may be like technically true, even if it's even in scenarios where it's not good to say it. I think it's just like um, I don't know. There's something you said at the end there though that kind of made me want to disagree with it, and I don't know. Maybe I just got to think more about what it is. But anyway, I guess
Yeah,
that's
I think I think the reason why it's hard is because it gets into how ought words be used, and what definitions ought be, and if you should
yeah.
go along with what a word's meaning is evolving into, as opposed to what like it strictly is. And that's a really hard one. I
Yeah.
don't know like what the right answer is there.
I mean, I get, you know what I think it was that you said that kind of like put up a red flag for me was when you said something about the like it's not in the spirit of the way that the word is used.
Yeah.
But I think if I just interpret that as kind of like a recapitulation of what you had been saying over the last couple of minutes, then I think I don't really have a problem with it. That like if I call something unconscious racism, like yeah, I would say it's literally true. It's probably also going to have some misleading implications. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
It's kind of like you almost imagine like what is it like to be to have been like it's like right when you're on the point where you're right on the cusp of a word changing meaning. How do you decide which way to go? Because in the moment you don't know, right? Like, like the F slur used to literally mean like a bundle of sticks. But obviously now it doesn't mean that. But theoretically, there was probably a point in time where it's like, wait, does it mean this? Does it mean that? I guess an even better example would be like the how the F slur is literally the word for cigarette in Britain. And that's a real one where it's like, man, I don't know. Like, are you obligated to stop using that word, even if you're in like a smaller community in Britain that genuinely uses it to describe cigarette? Like, I don't know. That's a really hard. Like the philosophy of language, I think, is really complicated, and I don't know where I land on that.
Yeah, and this is something that's come up a lot in recent years with a few different words. Like, I mean, racism certainly being one of them. There were people arguing about what is and is not racism. Another one that we've had repeatedly is like, what is a woman? What is gender? Like
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say on these topics. I kind of almost don't want to go off on a tangent
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
far right now. I mean, whatever. Like,
in America this summer particularly, and you often blame that on Democratic mayors and Democratic governors, but in fact there have been equivalent spikes in Republican-led cities like Tulsa and Fort Worth. So the question is this really a party issue?
I think it's a party issue. You can bring in a couple of examples, but if you look at Chicago, what's going on in Chicago, where 53.
Okay, you can't be like, that's only a couple examples. So what about this example? Like you can't do that. Oh my God! So
People were shot.
Maybe he's gonna go into
Died
more
shot.
here. He's gonna use Chicago as an example, but then he's gonna make an appeal to the data.
I mean, you can't.
Nobody's ever seen anything. The numbers are going up.
You can't do that with people who are holding your feet to the fire and expecting you to be consistent.
Obviously,
but,
yeah, you can get away with it, but oh my gosh.
Crime. It is crazy what's going on. And he doesn't want to say law and order because he can't, because he'll lose his radical left supporters. And once he does that, it's over with. But if he ever got to run this country and they ran it the way he would want to run it, our suburbs would be gone. By the way, our suburbs would be gone.
As of 2022, the suburbs are not gone, by the way.
Suburb unless you took a wrong turn.
Oh, I know suburbs.
He would know. I was
Go ahead. Wait a minute.
I was raised in the suburbs. This is not 1950. All these dog whistles and racism don't work anymore. Suburbs are by and large integrated. There's many people today driving their kids to soccer practice and or to black and white and Hispanic in the same car as there have been any time in the past. What really is a threat to the suburbs and their safety is his failure to deal with COVID. They're dying in the suburbs. His failure to deal with the environment. They're being flooded. They're being burned out because his refusal to do anything. That's why the suburbs are in trouble.
I do want to.
So speaking on that point, I really wonder if we're getting closer to the cusp of some of these environmental impacts really starting to get people to change. Because the classic thing with climate change is like it's such a long-term impact that you're so disconnected from. It's difficult for humans to really register that. But I don't know where you or other people listening are, but like where I'm at, like it's like seasonal. Like, oh, it's that time of the year, time to close up all the windows, don't let any of the smoke in. Because if you go out there for a couple hours, you can get sick breathing in all the smoke from some giant ass wildfire that's burning somewhere. And like the flooding that you're seeing, man, I really wonder if there's going to be a big shift in that anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, the idea, like you were saying, is it takes a while for the chickens to come home to roost, if you want to put it that way, right? But it seems like there's some chickens beginning to arrive. If you
Yeah,
want to
we're
put,
starting to get a couple of them. Yeah.
yeah, and as far as where I'm at, I'm in California, and the last house I lived in, I had to evacuate twice because of wildfires. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, there's also just this entire generation of young people who are utterly convinced that climate change is the biggest issue, and really, I think they're even convinced a little too far in terms of some of their predictions, like the way AOC sometimes talks about, the world is going to end in 40 years. It's not going to be that bad. It's going to be really bad. But yeah, I think I think there's a lot of signs that point to in the next 20 years there being a big shift in terms of how important climate change is and the fact that you have to have a climate change plan. It's not an option. There's a difference between the Republican plan on climate change and the Democrat plan, but you can't get away with not having a plan.
and really, like it's as the other energy options become more affordable and as gas prices are probably never coming down, it's like
Yeah.
it's really hard to justify this kind of like old school Republican line of like, oh, we just need more coal and oil and that's the solution.
Yeah, and especially solar. It's actually crazy that just how better solar is now than even a couple years ago. It's just light years of advancement there. We're to the point now where solar can probably solve for most grid power in the West. You don't even need anything else. You theoretically could do solar. It would just be a massive undertaking in order to build the infrastructure to do the solar, and then to have the methods of energy that solar's excesses can create with like hydrogen fuel and stuff like that, which then you can ship to areas that don't have the necessary like sun coverage for solar. But yeah, no, it's I think there's going to be a big shift on climate change, at least in the Western world, in the next like 10, 20 years. You already see like in Canada, which is more obviously more left leaning than America. In Canada, it's the conservative versus the liberal plan on climate change. But even the Conservative Party, Aaron O'Toole was certainly more of like a moderate, but even Paul Revere, who's coming in, wants to use green energy to solve climate change. He's, the era of climate change is overblown, and we don't have to do anything. I think that's just gone. That's dead.
Yeah, and at this point, I believe I might be wrong about this, but I believe even a majority of the Republican Party has acknowledged that it is both real and man-made. So yeah, we're
Yeah.
definitely heading in that direction.
To talk about this issue of law and order, though, and in the joint recommendation that came from the Biden-Bernie Sanders task force, you talked about, quote, reimagining policing. First of all, what does reimagining policing mean, and do you support?
It means
Let me, if I might finish the question. What does reimagining policing mean, and do you support the Black Lives Matter call for community control of policing?
look, what I support is the police having the opportunity to deal with the problems they face. And I'm totally opposed to defunding the police officers. As a matter of fact, local police, the only one defunding in his budget calls for a $400 million cut in local law enforcement assistance. They need more assistance. They need, when they show up for a 9/11 call, to have someone with them as a psychologist or psychiatrist to keep them from having to use force and be able to talk people down. We have to have community policing like we had before, where the officers get to know the people in the communities. That's when crime went down. It didn't go up, it went down. And so we have to be engaged.
That's not what they're talking about, Chris. That's not what they're talking. He's talking about defunding the police.
That is not true.
He doesn't have any law
Would you
support.
look?
He has no law enforcement
That's not
support.
true.
Almost
That's
nothing.
not. Look.
Oh, really? Who do you have? Name one group that supports you. Name one group that came out and supported you. Go
Look,
ahead.
look.
Think. We have time.
We don't have time to do
No,
anything.
think
so
about
listen.
it.
Look,
Name
folks,
one law enforcement group that came out and
I
supported
think, gentlemen,
you.
I think I'm going to take back the
There
moderator's
aren't. I don't
role,
think there are any.
and I want to get to another subject, which is the issue of protests in many cities that have turned violent. In Portland, Oregon, especially, we had more than 100 straight days of protests, which I think you would agree. You talk about peaceful protests. Many of those turned into riots. Mr. Vice President, you say that people who commit crimes should be held accountable. The question I have, though, is as the Democratic nominee, and earlier tonight you said that you are the Democratic Party right now, have you ever called the Democratic mayor of Portland or the Democratic governor of Oregon and said, hey, you got to stop this? bring in the National Guard, do whatever it takes, but you'd stop the days and months of violence in Portland.
I don't hold public office now. I am a former vice president. I've made it clear in my public statements that the violence should be prosecuted. It should be prosecuted, and anyone who commits it
But
should
you've
be
never
prosecuted.
called for the people, the leader, excuse me, sir. You had never called for the leaders in Portland and in Oregon to bring in the National Guard and knock off 100 days of riots.
They can, in fact, take care of it if he just stay out of the way. Look here.
Oh, really?
Oh,
really?
Here's the thing.
I sent in the U.S. Marshals to get the killer of the young man in the middle of the street, and they shot him. And for 3 days,
President Trump,
Portland wouldn't do anything. I had to send in the U.S. Marshals. They took care of business.
Go ahead, sir.
And by the way, you know, his own former spokesperson said, you know, riots and chaos and violence help his cause. That's what this is all about.
I don't know who said that.
I do.
Who?
I think Kellyanne Conway.
I don't think she said that.
She said that. And so here's the, here's the point. The point is that that's what he is, keeps trying to rile everything up. He doesn't want to calm things down. Instead of going in and talking to people and saying, let's get everybody together, figure out how to deal with this. What's he do? He just pours gasoline in the fire constantly, and every single solitary time.
And to end this, button up this segment, I'm going to give you a minute to answer, sir. You have repeatedly criticized.
I have to answer his statement.
No, you have repeatedly.
Wait,
you have no. You've been talking back and forth.
You made a statement.
I'm asking you.
I would love to end it.
Sir,
I would love to end it.
You know, if you want to switch seats,
we could very quickly.
We could do that, but
I'd send in the National Guard. It would be over. There'd be no problem.
Okay,
but they don't want to accept the National Guard.
You have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared
willing to do
specifically
that, but
do it? Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
You want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
white like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing.
Yeah, so there's obviously a very famous moment in the debates where Trump just doesn't do that. He doesn't tell them to do that. He says to stand back and stand by, obviously, you know, implying to wait. And then directly says someone needs to do something. We were just talking about how your rhetoric can set up a world in which the conclusion is to take direct action. Trump is not even really doing that indirectly. He's pretty directly saying, you know, hey, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. Someone needs to do something about this problem with Antifa, right? There's obviously encouraging the kind of violence we see between, you know, crazies on the left and crazies on the right in the streets, which is a really awful and horrible thing. Of course, it also has a ton of indiscriminate damage as well to people and to, you know, property and people's homes and businesses all over the country. I think it's something like over $1 billion of damage in total over all the rioting that happened throughout 2020. Yeah, and it's just, this is just another moment where I feel like it should be pretty obvious to everybody watching, like, wow, Trump's really crazy. But for some reason, people can just look at that and be like, yeah, no problem here, nothing going on, even though this is obviously a totally ridiculous statement.
It seems like the easiest win in the world for him to just go, yes, I condemn white supremacists. Also, he was asked specifically to do it. It's like, here's the easiest softball question ever, but he wouldn't.
Yeah, and it's just, you want to be able to point to these moments, but I mean, I think the Trump derangement syndrome on the right is real. They just don't acknowledge that any of these crazy moments. I mean, could you imagine the reverse if, you know, Joe Biden said, Antifa, stand back and stand by. Someone needs to do something about these racist Proud Boys. Like, obviously, everyone would be up in arms. I mean, we talked about Obama earlier, and, you know, everyone was afraid of Obama being dictator and stuff. If Obama said something like this, oh my God, it'd just be ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, we had people like saying that Obama was setting up death panels and say, you know, like.
Yeah, I'm still waiting on those Obamacare death panels, by the way. I'm still waiting.
Yeah.
I directly
this
said,
is a left-wing
white supremacist. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got it.
Not militia. That's what his
it's an idea.
FBI his
Okay.
FBI director
Gentlemen,
said.
Well,
we're
then
gonna-
you know what?
No,
He's
no, we're
wrong.
done. We're done, sir. We're moving on to the next. We're
Everybody
When
moving.
a bat
advice
hits
in
you
your
over the head, that's
administration.
not an idea.
Everybody in
Antifa
your
is bad.
administration tells you the truth has a bad idea.
Can I tell you what?
You have no ideas that are
Antifa is a dangerous,
All right,
radical
gentlemen,
group.
we're now moving on to the Trump
And
and
you ought to be
Biden
careful with
records.
them. They'll overthrow you.
When a president, I'm going to ask a question. When the president seeks a second term, it is generally a referendum on his record. But Vice President Biden, you like to quote one of your dad's sayings, which is, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And in this case, sir, you are the alternative. Looking at both of your records, I'm going to ask each of you, why should voters elect you president over your opponent? In this segment, President Trump, you go first, 2 minutes.
Because there has never been an administration or president who has done more than I've done in a period of 3.5 years. And that's despite the impeachment hoax. And you saw what happened today with Hillary Clinton, where it was a whole big con job. But despite going through all of these things, where I had to fight both flanks and behind me and above, there has never been an administration that's done what I've done. The greatest, before COVID came in, the greatest economy in history, lowest unemployment numbers. Everything was good. Everything was going. And by the way, there was unity going to happen. People were calling me for the first time in years. They were calling and they were saying, it's time maybe. And then what happened? We got hit, but now we're building it back up again. A rebuilding of the military, including Space Force and all of the other things. A fixing of the VA, which was a mess under him. 308,000 people died because they didn't have proper health care. It was a mess. And we now got a 91% approval rating at the VA, our vets. We take care of our vets. But we've rebuilt our military. The job that we've done, and I'll tell you some people say maybe the most important. By the end of the first term, I'll have approximately 300 federal judges and Court of Appeals judges, 300, and hopefully 3 great Supreme Court justices. That is a record, the likes of which very few people, and you know one of the reasons I'll have so many judges? Because President Obama and him left me 128 judges to fill. When you leave office, you don't leave any judges. That's like, you just don't do that. They left 128 openings, and if I were a member of his party,
This
because they
part's
have a
actually
little
true,
different
I think.
philosophy, I'd say if you left us 128 openings, you can't be a good president. You can't be a good vice president. But I want to thank you because it gives us almost, it'll probably be above that number by the end of this term.
Time, sir.
300 judges. It's a record.
Looking at both of your records, why should voters elect you president as opposed to President Trump?
this
You have 2
president-
minutes uninterrupted.
Under this president, we become weaker, sicker, poorer, more divided, and more violent. When I was vice president, we inherited a recession. I was asked to fix it. I did. We left him a booming economy, and he caused the recession. With regard to being weaker, the fact is that I've gone head-to-head with Putin and made it clear to him we're not going to take any of his stuff. He's Putin's puppy. He still refuses to even say anything to Putin about the bounty on the heads of American soldiers.
Your son got
No,
$3.5 million.
And by the way, my son...
Wait a minute. Mr. President, your campaign agreed to both sides would get 2-minute answers uninterrupted. Well, your side agreed to it, and why don't you observe what your campaign agreed to as a ground rule, okay, sir?
He never keeps his word. Can you add back
No,
He's
I'm
a
not
person
asking.
that's
That was a
not
rhetorical question.
Can you
Go
add
ahead,
back
sir.
30 seconds?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
you may have.
All right.
Go ahead.
So, thirdly, we're poor. The billionaires have gotten much more wealthy by a tune of over $300 to $400 billion more just since COVID. You in the home, you got less. You're in more trouble than you were before. In terms of being more violent, when we were in office, there were 15% less violence in America than there is today. He's president of the United States. It's on his watch. And with regard to more divided, the nation can't stay divided. We can't be this way. And speaking of my son, the way you talk about the military, the way you talk about them being losers and being and just being suckers. My son was in Iraq. He spent a year there. He got the Bronze Star. He got the Conspicuous Service Medal. He was not a loser. He was a patriot, And the people left behind there were heroes.
Really?
And I resent
Are you talking
like
about Hunter?
hell.
Are you talking about
I'm talking about my son, Bo Biden. You're talking about
I don't know, Bo. I know Hunter.
Yeah,
Hunter got thrown out of the military. He was thrown out, dishonorably discharged.
That's not true. He
For
wasn't dishonorably.
cocaine use. And he didn't have a job until you became vice president. And once you
None of
became
that
vice
is
president,
true.
he made a fortune in Ukraine, in China, in Moscow,
That is simply
and various
not
other places.
true.
He
My
made a
son,
fortune.
my son,
And he didn't have a job.
my son, like a lot of people we know at home, had a drug problem. He's overtaken it. He's fixed it. He's worked on it. And I'm proud of him.
But why was he
proud of
given
my
tens
son.
of millions
All right.
of
But he
dollars?
wasn't given
All right.
tens of
He was
millions of dollars.
given
That
tens
is
of
totally,
millions of
that's
dollars.
been totally
President Trump,
discredited.
we've already been
Totally discredited.
We've already been through this. I think the American people would rather hear about more substantial
So do I.
subjects. Well, you know, as the moderator, sir, I'm going to make
I know,
a
but when
judgment
somebody
call here.
gets $3.5 million
Okay, right.
from the
Let's talk
mayor
about-
of Moscow,
let's talk
That is
about-
not
I think
true.
it's a terrible
That
thing.
report is totally
Why did he get it?
discredited.
I
Mitt
think,
Romney on that committee said it wasn't worth taxpayers'
Gen-
money, that report. It was written for political reasons.
you know, I'd like
I just looked it up, and just to note, it is true that Hunter Biden was discharged from the military after testing positive for cocaine use, but it wasn't a dishonorable discharge. It was just a general administrative discharge.
Yeah, fair enough. And he
talk
did
about
have a
climate
bunch of
change.
jobs
So would I.
before that also, before
Yeah.
the Obama administration.
Okay. The forest fires in the West are raging now. They have burned millions of acres. They have displaced hundreds of thousands of people. When state officials there blame the fires on climate change, Mr. President, you said, I don't think the science knows. Over your 4 years, you have pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord. You have rolled back a number of Obama environmental records.
This was the same
What
year that I
do
had to
you
evacuate
believe
my
about
house
the
twice.
science of climate change, and what will you do in the next 4 years to confront it?
I want crystal clean water and air. I want beautiful clean air. We have now the lowest carbon. If you look at our numbers right now, we are doing phenomenally. But I haven't destroyed our businesses. Our businesses aren't put out of
We have
commission.
now the
If you
lowest
look at the
carbon, he
Paris
said.
Accord, it was a disaster from our standpoint. And people are actually very
It's really interesting. I don't think I've ever noticed this before, but he oftentimes just talks about how he wants these great things. And he'll use this great language about it and then just sort of move on, almost like sort of invoking that as like what he's getting at without really describing. So he'll say like, you know, like he says here, I want you beautiful, clean, crystal water. And, you know, and by the way, right, like he'll just describe like, oh, would it be amazing if we had that? And then never really sort of get into it and just move on.
Yeah, I
I
remember
wonder how
he did.
intentional that is, because it seems like it's a pattern I'm noticing throughout this debate.
He did the same thing earlier with the drug prices. He's like, I'm gonna lower drug prices. You wouldn't lower drug prices or something.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, I think it's kind of an intentional strategy. It seems like a pretty effective one too. To sort of be getting the benefit of talking about these great outcomes, but then sort of sidestepping the fact that you don't really have a way to actually get them.
Yeah, and that's kind of a long-standing standard politician way of speaking, but Trump does it in a little bit of a unique way.
But some spin up.
very happy about what's going on because our businesses are doing well. As far as the fires are concerned, you need forest management in addition to everything else. The forest floors are loaded up with trees, dead trees that are years old, and they're like tinder, and leaves and everything else. You drop a cigarette in there, the whole forest burns down. You've got to have forest management.
What do you
You've got to have
believe?
cuts.
What do you believe about?
Okay. As one of the rare instances where I actually have some personal knowledge on this, this is a well-known thing that Trump's talking about. Used to be forest firefighters used to be the policy, they just stop a fire. Anytime a fire happens, you stop it. And this led to a huge buildup of dead wood, which would then cause fires to get out of control and they couldn't be stopped. So that's the real thing he's talking about. But this has been a known thing for a long time. It's like standard policy in the Park Service across all federal parks in order to do controlled burns. If you go to Yellowstone or Glacier or any big national park, there's a decent chance you'll go through a section that has a bunch of burned trees. And you'll be like, oh my God, what happened? Is they did a controlled burn where they will intentionally start fires. And they will start these fires and they'll do work beforehand, doing like cut lines and stuff in order to ensure that it only burns in a controlled way to clear out that dead wood and so that the fire doesn't get out of control and consume the entire park. I don't know why he's bringing this up. This is my understanding. This is like a universal policy throughout like the Forest Service and managing American forests.
Yeah, there was a funny moment with Trump where he was talking about a conversation he supposedly had with the president of Finland, and I guess there was some public dispute about whether this conversation happened or what were the contents of it. But it was something like the president of Finland explained to me that all you got to do is go to the forest and rake up the leaves, or something. It was something
Yeah, well,
ridiculous like that.
it's not the leaves more than actual the wood from dead trees and branches and stuff like that that builds up. You can't remove it. It's way too hard. So you just have to burn it. Yeah, hold on. I actually want to rewind here. I'm not. I don't understand why he brings this up.
Change, and what will you do in the next 4 years to confront it?
I want crystal clean water and air. I want beautiful clean air. We have now the
No, as opposed to all the people who want the very dirty air and the dirty
lowest
water.
carbon. If you look at
Well,
our
that's
numbers
presumably
right now,
Biden,
Yeah.
right?
we are doing phenomenally. But I haven't destroyed our businesses. Our businesses aren't put out of commission. If you look at the Paris Accord, it was a disaster from our standpoint. And people are actually very happy about what's going on because our businesses are doing well. As far as the fires are concerned, you need forest management in addition to everything else.
Okay, yeah, he's saying
The
you need it.
forest
We
floors
already
are
do
loaded
this.
up with trees, dead trees that are years old, and they're like tinder, and leaves and everything else. You drop a cigarette in there, the whole forest burns down. You've got to have forest management.
What do you
You've got to have
believe?
cuts.
What do you believe about the science of climate change, sir?
I believe that we have to do everything we can to have immaculate air, immaculate water, and do whatever else we can that's good. You know, we're planting.
Okay, but doing everything we can, doesn't that imply you would be willing to compromise on the like? Okay, whatever.
And the same things you would do
so
to,
dumb.
like, if you want
And it's
clean
very
air and clean
exciting
water,
that-
you would
that
do the same
human
things that climate change,
Pollution,
activists
gas,
want you to
greenhouse
do.
gas
But
emissions contributes to the global warming of
I
this
think
planet.
a lot of things do, but I think to an extent, yes. I think to an extent, yes. But I also think we have to do better management of our forests. Every year, I get the call, California's burning. California's burning. If that was cleaned, if you had forest management, good forest management, you wouldn't be getting those calls. You know, in Europe, they have forest cities. They're called forest cities. They maintain their forests. They manage their forests. I was with the head of a major country. It's a forest city. He
Oh,
said,
this is the
"Sir,
one.
We
This-
have trees that are far more, they ignite much easier than California. There shouldn't be that problem. I spoke with the governor about it. I'm getting along very well with the governor. But I said, you know, at some point, you can't every year have hundreds of thousands of acres of land just burned to the ground.
But, sir,
That's burning down because of a lack of
But,
management.
sir, if you
So
believe in
no, that would not be the case. The reason why you had to implement these things is because you had disastrous fires very rarely. But if the problem is a buildup of dead wood, then a couple years of a bunch of fires would clear that all out. But instead, it's consistently like for almost like a decade now, California's been having problems with these giant forest fires. So no, that just isn't true.
The Myopic Times in chat says that Trump withheld federal aid from California over the sanctuary city thing. So I don't know. Like maybe that's relevant to the. Is that is Myopic? Is that like disaster relief money, or was that money that was supposed to go to?
That'd been my assumption if he's mentioning it here. It'd be like funds that they would help to fight the forest fires. It sounds exactly like the kind of thing that Trump would do. Although I haven't heard of this, so I can't speak to it.
Yeah, I don't know about it either.
science of climate change, why have you rolled back the Obama Clean Power Plan, which limited carbon emissions in power plants? Why have you relaxed?
Because it was driving energy prices through the sky.
Why have you relaxed fuel economy standards that are going to create more pollution from cars
Well,
and
not
trucks?
really, because what's happening is the car is much less expensive and it's a much safer car, and you're talking about a tiny difference.
Yeah, how is it safer?
And then what would happen, because of the cost of the car, you would have at least double and triple the number of cars purchased. We have the old slugs out there that are 10, 12 years old. If you did that, the car would be safer. It would be much cheaper by
But in the case of
$3,500.
California, they've simply
No,
ignored
but you would take a lot of
your
cars
rollback.
off the market because people would be able to afford a car. Now, and by the way, we're going to see how that turns out. But a lot of people agree with me, many people. The car has gotten so expensive because they have computers all over the place for an extra little bit of gasoline. And, and I'm okay with electric cars, too. I think I'm all for electric cars. I've given big incentives for electric cars. But what they've done in California is just crazy.
Vice President Biden, I'd like you to respond to the president's climate change record, but I also want to ask you about a concern. You proposed $2 trillion in green jobs. You talk about new limits, not abolishing, but new limits on fracking, ending the use of fossil fuels to generate electricity by 2035, and zero net emission of greenhouse gases by 2050. The president says a lot of these things would tank the economy and cost millions of jobs.
He's absolutely wrong, number one. Number two, if in fact, during our administration, the Recovery Act, I was in charge.
Destroyed him there. He's wrong.
Of renewable energy to cheaper than or as cheap as coal and gas and oil. Nobody's going to build another coal-fired plant in America. No one's going to build another oil-fired plant in America. They're going to move to renewable energy, number one. Number two, we're going to make sure that
can we pause for a second?
The federal fleet and turn.
So we were talking earlier about how it seems like in order for people to take action on climate change, they have to be seeing immediate consequences, and it has to like become economical to do the transition. Do you think this is at all a legitimate argument in favor of the kind of like market solution, the hypothesis that a lot of like libertarian type people have, that like if this is really a problem, the market will take care of it, because apparently it does seem to be the case that when prices for things when it becomes economically viable to switch over to renewable energy, then apparently that's when people actually do it.
I feel markets are awesome. They're a great, powerful tool, but I wish people would not moralize them. It feels like people talk about capitalism is such an awesome moral system, or oh no, it's such an evil system. No, it's just like a good way we found to allocate shit. That's it. Okay, it does a nice job, and there are some things it's really good at, like pizza, right? Seems to be doing a pretty good job handling pizza, but there are other things like the police, where it's like, yeah, maybe we don't want the police to be entirely privatized. Right? Maybe you could have some private security. That's something. We can have some oversight into that. You can't have markets solve for climate alone, but they are a really big, important part. Something that was recently passed in the Inflation Reduction Act that is really, really important is the government adopting a bunch of green technologies, specifically a bunch of electric cars in their fleet. This is so important because it means that the government is going to be taking all the early adopter penalties off the table for private companies. Whoever first adopts a technology has to deal with the technology first hitting actually being implemented, right? When the rubber hits the road, things don't go exactly to plan. No plan survives contact with the enemy, and it's the exact same for technologies. Additionally, because it's brand new, right, it's more expensive. But after those early adopters go through that process, when those problems are seen and fixed, that lowers the barrier to entry and the cost of using that technology for other people, right? It's very similar to how the F-35, I don't know if you ever followed the F-35 sort of boondoggle discussion, was, the F-35 is so...
fighter jet, is that right?
Yeah, it's a fighter jet. Yeah, it's the newest fifth generation fighter jet of the American forces and our allies. And it got criticized for being way more expensive than our previous fighter jets, but that's because it was early in its development. And now that we're 10 years into the program, its costs have come way down because we've refined the process. So markets are a really great way for us to be able to spread something, but we need to make it viable for those markets. That's why things like having the government early adopt solar or other green technologies, providing financial incentives for them, are a great tool, because it just isn't feasible for the government to come down and say, all right, all of you are going to implement this technology. But what does work is if the government can help sort of conduce the markets for green technology to be more viable, and then it sort of comes naturally. So markets are a really important tool, but you don't talk about them like they're magic, be it good or bad magic. They're a tool that we can use, and they're not the only tool that we have. We need to make sure that these things are set up to be financially viable in the first place in order for markets to work.
So it seems like the best case scenario is that we have both markets and governments, trying to make this transition to renewable energy.
Social democracy is just the way to do things.
Yeah, and it seems like pretty clear that in really authoritarian states, you could conceivably do it with just governments doing, like China can do this kind of thing where they, if they want to, they could just decide tomorrow we're moving to all renewable energy, like, damn whatever the markets have to say about it.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just not sure if it could work the other way around, right? If there's a country that's just completely, as close to like laissez-faire libertarian economy as you could find on Earth, to what degree? I don't know. I mean, I suppose eventually they would adapt, just based
Yeah,
on.
I think, yeah, I mean, like all things in life, I think it's a bounce. Markets are a really good tool, but they're ultimately a tool, not the only one. And obviously, I mean, almost nobody believes that, like, fully unless you're Fabian Liberty Scott, you probably acknowledge that, we need to have a government, we need to have some taxes, things like this. Um, Thankfully, that doesn't seem to be something that's really hotly contested.
Yeah, and hope, and like you were saying, the two can work together. The government can kind of like
Yeah.
steer the markets in certain ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the most effective tool we have to solve these problems.
Yeah, particularly when you have sectors of the market that are almost competitive but not quite, and they just need like a little bit of boost to reach the tipping
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, and in order to solve these problems in the first place, if you set up the incentives, the government can set up the incentives, and then the markets can find the actual way to do it. I'm reminded of cap and trade with sulfur and phosphorus outputs on factories was an amazing way where the government said, "Hey, we are going to give you each, a certain amount of phosphor that you're allowed to pollute. After that, you are going to be fined." But you can trade. You can trade the bonds you essentially have, the legal rights you have to pollute to other companies for money, which means that, sectors of the economy, or not even sectors, businesses that do pollute and have easy ways to get rid of that pollution will do that because then they can sell off. If it only costs us $10, to get rid of our phosphorus pollution, we can then sell the rights to pollute how much phosphorus we are allowed for $50 to the company that's like, man, we cannot get rid of this. It's kind of just like part of the process. And that just creates such an amazing economic incentive by which all these corporations now have incentives to try and find, is there any way we can get rid of this stuff? We're always looking for better ways. And it had a massive effect in terms of cutting down on acid rain and stuff like this. That was actually a real problem on the horizon in certain places of the world.
Cap and trade, I think, is a really good example because the consequences of pollution happen largely due to how much pollution is happening in aggregate, right?
Yep.
But if you set this kind of like aggregate cap, but then you allow individuals the flexibility to maneuver within it as long as the group of them collectively stays under some other limit, it's
Yeah.
a pretty
It's
good.
actually like a it's actually like a genius policy. Just like thinking up that idea and then the ability to trade them and the way that it actually works out in the economy. It's so cool.
Turned into a fleet that's run on their electric vehicles. Making sure that we can do that, we're going to put 500,000 charging stations and all of the highways that we're going to be building in the future. We're going to build an economy that, in fact, is going to provide for the ability us to take 4 million buildings and make sure that they, in fact, are weatherized in a way that, in fact, they'll emit significantly less gas and oil because the heat will not be going out. There's so many things that we can do now to create thousands and thousands of jobs. We can get to net zero in terms of energy production by 2035. Not only not costing people jobs, creating millions of good paying jobs, not $15 an hour, but prevailing wage, by having a new infrastructure that in fact is green. And the first thing I will do, I will rejoin the Paris Accord. I will join the Paris Accord because with us out of it, look what's happening. It's all falling apart. And talk about someone who has no relationship with foreign policy. Brazil, the rainforests of Brazil are being torn down, are being ripped down. More carbon is absorbed in that rainforest than every bit of carbon that's emitted in the United States. Instead of doing something about that, I would be gathering up and making sure we had the countries of the world coming up with $20 billion and say, here's $20 billion. Stop tearing down the forest. And if you don't, then you're going to have significant economic consequences.
What about the argument that President Trump basically says that you have to balance environmental interests and economic interests, and he's drawn his line?
Well, he hadn't drawn a line. He still, for example, make sure that he wants to make sure that methane's not a problem. You can now emit more methane without it being a problem. Methane. This is a guy who says that you don't have to have mileage standards for automobiles that exist now. This is the guy who says that, well, the fact that it's all true. And here's the deal.
He's talking about the Green New Deal, and it's not $2 billion or $20 billion, as you said. It's $100 trillion.
I'm talking about
The 20 billion, I think, was in terms of the money being offered to Brazil as a, well, instead of you getting paid 20 billion to cut it down, we'll pay you 20 billion to not cut it down. So this is just totally like a mixing of the numbers here.
Yeah,
And
like
also-
if I take Biden at his word, though, like that seems like a little bit of a dangerous policy prescription, right? Because if people get rewarded for essentially like creating a crisis, right? It's like, I'm gonna start doing something bad, now pay me to stop it.
Yeah, I think you can argue a little bit of uniqueness in terms of, there's only one Brazilian rainforest that's absorbing a huge amount of the planet's CO2. And it's also the case that, there's already a financial incentive for them to do that, that we're countering with our bribe offer. If some random person was like, I'm going to cut down my forest, when there really isn't an economic viability to do so, that threat sort of rings a lot more hollow.
Yeah, I guess. It's just the thing is, I would rather that there not be like a scenario where they end up better off for having threatened to do it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
right?
I think the real strategy, and this is done by a lot of like activist organizations, is just buy it up yourself and then say we're never selling this.
Yeah.
Also, obligatory, Biden does not support the Green New Deal.
Where they want to rip down
Go for a
buildings
minute, and then you can go.
and rebuild the building.
No,
It's the
that is
dumbest,
not-
most
that
ridiculous.
is not-
Where airplanes are out of
Wait a minute, sir.
business,
That's
where two-car systems are out, where they
Not
want
true.
to take out the cows too.
Not
That's not
true.
true either, right?
Not
This is a 100
Simply,
trillion.
look,
That's more money than
that
our
is-
country could make in
that is
100
simply
years if we're
not
going
the case.
All right, let
It
me,
will destroy our
because I
country.
actually, wait a minute, sir. I actually have studied your plan, and it includes upgrading 4 million buildings, weatherizing 2 million homes over 4 years, building 1.5 million energy-efficient homes. So the question becomes, the president is saying, I think some people who support the president would say that sounds like it's going to cost a lot of money and hurt the economy.
What it's going to do is going to create thousands and millions of jobs, good-paying
trillion.
jobs.
Let him finish, sir.
He doesn't know how to do that.
$100
They-
trillion.
The fact is, it's going to create millions of good-paying jobs, and these tax incentives to people for people to weatherize, which he wants to get rid of. It's going to make the economy much safer. Look how much we're paying now to deal with the hurricanes. By the way, he has an answer for hurricanes. He said maybe we should drop a nuclear weapon on them. They may.
I never said that.
That's
at all.
he did say.
You made it up.
And here's the deal.
You make up a
we
lie.
are going to be in a position where we can create hard, good jobs by making sure the environment is clean and we all are in better shape. We spend billions of dollars on floods, hurricanes, rising seas. We're in real
I looked
trouble.
up the
Look
hurricane
what's
thing,
happened
by
just in
the way.
Midwest with these
Trump
storms that
did not
come through and
publicly
wipe
ever
out
say that, but
entire-
some of his officials
Yeah, it was.
reported that he said that behind the scenes. So
Yeah.
we can't know for sure.
Yeah, we don't know for sure, but it's certainly not. It's not the kind of thing where I hear that I'm like, no way that. Like,
Yeah. Although if any other president had that reported about them, we probably would be saying no way.
Yeah. If there was ever a president to suggest it, I think it'd be our boy Donald.
sections and counties in Iowa. That didn't happen before. They're because of global warming. We make up 15% of the world's problem. We, in fact, but the rest of the world, we've got to get them to come along. That's why we have to get back into the Paris Accord.
All right, gentlemen,
Wait a minute, Chris. So why didn't he do it for 47 years? You were vice president. Why didn't you get the world? China sends up real dirt into the
This
Russia.
is. I don't think we really need to go into it, but obviously this is a really stupid argument that gets made all the time. Well, Biden was in government for 47 years. How come every problem ever hasn't been solved? This is obviously a really dumb thing if you think about it for more than a couple seconds. And I would encourage anybody who has made this argument previously to really reflect on what the implication of that argument would be in order for it to be correct.
Yeah, and so this I think is like the most basic, most common argument that comes up in presidential debates. It's just like good thing happened while you were in office or bad thing happened while you were in office, and like just assume you're responsible if it happened under your watch.
Yep.
As India does, they all do. We're supposed to be good. And by the way, he made a couple of statements. The Green New Deal is $100 trillion.
That is not
$20
my
billion.
plan.
That's
the Green
well,
New
you want to
Deal
rebuild every
is
building.
not my plan.
I want to rebuild every.
If he knew anything about, if he knew
He made a statement about the military. He said I said something about the military. He and his friends made it up, and then they went with it. I never said it.
Okay.
That is
What
not
he
true.
did
Sir,
is he
you're done in
said
this segment.
he called
Mr.
the military
Vice President,
stupid bastards.
I
and he
did
said
not
it on
say
tape.
that.
He said
Mr.
stupid
please,
bastards. He
sir,
said it.
stop.
I would never
I
say
would
that.
Play it.
Stop.
Play it.
Go ahead.
You're
Mr.
on
Vice
tape.
President answered his final question.
The final question is, I can't remember which of all his rantings.
I'm having a little trouble myself, but and about the economy and about this question of what it's going to cost.
The
So
economy.
I just looked
the
up.
Green New
Can
Deal
we
and
pause
the
for a
idea of
I looked up the stupid bastards thing. He did say it, but it was like apparently very
Yes, it
obviously
was-
a joke.
No, I know the exact one. It's like when you call your friend like a son of, like, I'm busting your balls, you son of a bitch. It's very like jovial.
Yeah, he said it pretty much
I
exactly.
think Biden should lean more into that, to be honest. I think like when Biden was talking to that reporter, and the reporter said, "Is inflation a good thing for your election?" Biden said, "What a stupid son of a bitch." Like he should just be doing more of that. He should lean into it. I think I think it comes off as a very good, like, sort of blue collar, like grassroots kind of guy appeal.
Yeah.
what your
The
environmental
Green New
changes
Deal,
will do.
The Green New Deal will pay for itself as we move forward. You're not going to build plants that, in fact, are great polluting plants.
So do you
We're going to
support
build.
the Green New Deal?
Pardon me?
You support?
No, I don't support the Green
Oh,
New
you
Deal.
don't? Oh, well, that's a
You
big
let-
statement.
I
That
support
means you
the
just
block.
lost the radical left.
I
Yeah.
support. The
I like how
That's
he.
got a moment where you should say, "Good, I don't like the radical left. They're a bunch of crazies, just like you." Like, boom, slam dunk.
Also, like, how can you lose the radical left like 4 times in the same debate? Like once.
Yeah, it's yeah, or just turn around and be like, "Oh, okay, I've lost radical left, then I'm not beholden to them anymore. So you better shut the hell up about all these arguments about how I support." Like that's the kind
Yeah.
of thing. Oh, man, I feel like there's an opportunity here
Yeah.
that can be
He-
seized.
He could clap back at him pretty hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
plan that I put forward.
Okay.
The Biden plan, which is different than what he calls the radical Green New Deal.
All right, gentlemen, final segment. Election integrity. As we meet tonight, millions of Americans are receiving mail-in ballots or going to vote early. How confident should we be that this will be a fair election? And what are you prepared to do over the next 5+ weeks? Because it'll not only be to Election Day, but also counting some ballots, mail-in ballots after Election Day. What are you prepared to do to reassure the American people that the next president will be the legitimate winner of this election? In this final segment, Mr. Vice President, you go first.
Oh
Fact, when
boy.
people vote, they should
Nice
go to
topic.
iwillvote.com. Decide how they're going to vote, when they're going to vote, and what means by which they're going to vote. His own Homeland Security Director, and as well as the FBI Director, says there is no evidence at all that mail-in ballots are a source of being manipulated and cheating. They said that. The fact is that there are going to be millions of people because of COVID that are going to be voting by mail-in ballots, like he does, by the way. He sits behind the Resolute desk and sends his ballot to Florida, number one. Number two, we're going to make sure that those people who want to vote in person are able to vote because enough poll watchers are there to make sure they can socially distance. The polls are open on time, and the polls stay open until the votes are counted. And this is all about trying to dissuade people from voting because he's trying to scare people into thinking that it's not going to be legitimate. Show up and vote. You will determine the outcome of this election. Vote, vote, vote. If you're able to vote early in your state, vote early. If you're able to vote in person, vote in person. Vote whatever way is the best way for you, because he cannot stop you from being able to determine the outcome of this election. And in terms of whether or not, when the votes are counted and they're all counted, that will be accepted. If I win, that will be accepted. If I lose, that'll be accepted. But by the way, if in fact he says he's not sure what he's going to accept, well, let me tell you something. It doesn't matter, because if we get the votes, it's going to be all over. He's going to go. He can't stay in power. It won't happen. It won't happen. So vote. Just make sure you understand you have it in your control to determine what this country is going to look like the next 4 years. Is it going to change? Or you get 4 more years of these lies?
Mr. President, 2 minutes.
So when I listened to Joe talking about a transition, there's been no transition from when I won. I won that election. And if you look at crooked Hillary Clinton, if you look at all of the different people, there was no transition, because they came after me trying to do a coup. They came after me spying on my campaign. They started from the day I won.
If he's talking about the Obama wiretapping thing, I don't think any evidence was literally ever presented for this. In the 2016 campaign, Trump made the claim that, like, the Obama administration wiretapped his campaign. He literally never advanced a single piece of evidence for that claim. So, just if that's what he's referring to in terms of spying in his campaign, which that's the only thing that he could be referencing, at least as far as I'm aware, then yeah, that's just some total bullshit.
And even before I won, from the day I came down the escalator with our First Lady, they were a disaster. They were a disgrace to our country. And we've caught them. We've caught them all. We've got it all on tape. We've caught them all. And by the way, you gave the idea for the Logan Act against...
Oh, sorry, I think I just slid out there a little bit.
General Flynn. You better take a look at that, because we caught you in a sense, and President Obama was sitting in the office. He knew about it too. So don't tell me about a free transition. As far as the ballots are concerned, it's a disaster. A solicited ballot, okay, solicited is okay. You're soliciting, you're asking, they send it back, you send it back. I did that. If you have an unsolicited, they're sending millions of ballots all over the country. There's fraud. They found them in creeks. They found some with the name Trump, just happened to have the name Trump just the other day in a waste paper basket. They're being sent all over the place. They sent 2. In
I like the implication that if a ballot ever were to turn up in a creek or a waste paper basket, that's fraud. Like, couldn't somebody just throw away their mail-in ballot?
Yeah, I mean, it's just... These arguments are horrible, and anyone who actually has any shred of, like, intellectual honesty will admit that. If anybody's seriously talking to you about, like, the election in 2020 was, undermined by, was rigged, that votes were actually changed, then, this person is just either incredibly deluded or not being honest with themselves.
2 ballots. This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen. The other thing, it's nice on November 3rd, you're watching and you see who won the election. And I think we're going to do well, because people are really happy with the job we've done. But you know what? We won't know. We might not know for months, because these ballots are going to be all over. Take a look at what happened in Manhattan. Take a look at what happened in New Jersey. Take a look at what happened in Virginia and other places. They're not losing 2%, 1%, which, by the way, is too much. An election could be won or lost with that. They're losing 30 and 40%. It's a fraud, and it's a shame. And can you imagine where they say you have to have your ballot in by November 10th? November 10th. That means that's 7 days after the election, in theory, should have been announced.
Okay.
We have major states with that.
Sir,
all run by
2
Democrats.
minutes is 2 minutes.
All run by Democrats. It's
President Trump,
it's a rigged election.
you're going to be able to continue. You have been charging for months that mail-in balloting is going to be a disaster. You say it's rigged, that it's going to lead to fraud.
Myopic in chat linked to a video, which I haven't watched it, but what he says is that it's a news report on some Republicans apparently burned their own ballots in order to produce evidence for Trump that Republican ballots were being destroyed.
Jussie Smollett moment right there. Oh, it's just one of those things where both political sides do it, and it's really concerning, because it means that it's probably coming from a much stronger source when people are willing to just totally lie and fabricate for these tiny little stories. And of course, all it takes is for you to see 2 or 3 of those stories, and then you become totally convinced that, oh yeah, there really was an operation to get rid of these ballots, and that just becomes embedded in your mind for 10 fucking years.
31 million people voted mail-in voting. That was a quarter, more than a quarter of all the voters that year cast their ballots by mail. Now that millions of mail-in ballots have gone out, what are you going to do about it? And are you counting on the Supreme Court, including a Justice Barrett, to settle any dispute?
Yeah, I think I'm counting on them to look at the ballots, definitely. I hope we don't need them in terms of the election itself. But for the ballots, I think so. Because what's happening is incredible. I read today, where at least 1% of the ballots for 2016 were invalidated. They take them, we don't like them, we don't like them.
But what are you going to do about it? If there are millions of ballots going out right now,
what you do is you go and vote. You do a solicited ballot, and that's okay, or you go and vote.
I'm asking you about the fact that millions of people...
You go and vote. You go and vote,
but
like they
used
to in the old...
Millions of people...
You either do, Chris, a solicited ballot where you're sending it in, they're sending it back, and you're sending... They have mailmen with lots of it. Did you see what's going on? Take a look at West Virginia, mailmen selling the ballots. They're being sold. They're being dumped in rivers. This is a horrible thing for our country. This is not going to end well. This is not going to end well.
5 states have had mail-in ballots for the last
I think it ended pretty
decade
well.
or more.
The deep state sends its regards.
5, including 2 Republican states. And you don't have to solicit the ballot. It's sent to you. It's sent to your home. What we're saying is,
yeah, do you think there's a Red Wedding edit where like Rob Stark is Trump and like Roose Bolton is like Amy is like Brett Kavanaugh or something? Oh god, I bet that exists.
Oh man, I'm doing this like AI art stuff. I should just make a picture.
Election day. If it doesn't get in till the 7th, 8th, 9th, it still should be counted. He's just afraid of counting the votes because
You're wrong. You're wrong.
I want to continue with you on this, Vice President Biden.
Chris, he's so wrong when he makes a statement like that.
Excuse me, Vice President Biden. The biggest problem, in fact, over the years with mail-in voting has not been fraud historically. It has been that sizable numbers, sometimes hundreds of thousands of ballots are thrown out because they have not been properly filled out, or there is some other irregularity, or they missed the deadline. So the question I have is, are you concerned that the Supreme Court with a Justice Barrett will settle any dispute?
I'm concerned that any court would settle this because here's the deal. When you get a ballot and you fill it out, you're supposed to have an affidavit. If you didn't know, you have someone say that this is me. You should be able to, if in fact you can verify that's you before the ballot is thrown out, that's sufficient to be able to count the ballot because someone made a mistake and not dotting the correct I. Who they voted for, testify, say who they voted for, say it's you, that is totally legitimate.
All right.
Excuse me, Chris, when you have 80 million ballots,
I have a final
sending
question.
and swamping the system, you know it can't be done. You know it can't, and already there's been
so now
fraud.
Mail service delivers
wait a minute, gentlemen.
final
Question is, in 8 states, we can keep talking. In 8 states, election workers are prohibited.
Can we pause for a second?
Currently by law.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any feasible way for to kind of address this election fraud thing in terms of like basically people believe that there is or isn't election fraud based on which media sources are telling them what, and it seems like there isn't really any way at present for them to verify to have any like firsthand account of there was or wasn't fraud going on. They kind of just have to take somebody's word for it. Do you think there's any solution to that problem where, I don't know.
I mean, not one that I'm aware of right now. I think the biggest thing is to prevent people from falling down these rabbit holes as opposed to getting them out. I really don't know what you do with someone that's down in this rabbit hole. It seems like you just have to like give them time. I think there's a lot more energy. There's a lot more productive things to be done in terms of how do we stop people from, going on Facebook and in the course of like 2 weeks coming out the other side being like, yep, so JFK is alive and Trump is his appointed warrior and he's going to take back the government. You can pull people out of these rabbit holes, but it's not like, I don't think there's like some process that like, well, if we just implement this process, we can get all these people. It's just like a time thing and the people that they personally know and like deeply important personal events in their life.
I guess I was imagining some version of like election transparency, right? Like if there were just some vast reservoir of like public records that anybody could access and they could just go check for themselves or something. I don't know if that's at all feasible, but
Yeah, I think these systems are, even if the funny thing is, if you implemented something like that, all the people that are talking about, oh, the shady government, they wouldn't even click on the link. They'd see, oh, I see that the fake tool is being put out. That's gonna, hide us. Not to mention, I mean, these systems are so complex that they're kind of hard to understand, even if they are entirely transparent.
yeah, I guess so. And like I don't know what information you could put up that people wouldn't just claim that that information is fake now too. Like I mean, what are
Yeah,
you gonna?
exactly. Like they're in if they want to, they can just falsify anything by saying, well, obviously this is rigged by the deep state.
Yeah, I mean, now that we have like, deep fake videos and stuff too, it's not like you could even just have. I mean, you could have literal videos of people counting all the ballots, and somebody would still say it's fake. So I don't know.
Yeah.
8 states from even beginning to process ballots, even take them out of the envelopes and
Yes.
flatten them until Election Day. That means that it's likely, because there's going to be a huge increase in mail-in balloting, that we are not going to know on election night who the winner is, that it could be days, it could be...
Wow. It's so impressive that the deep state had Chris Wallace tell this lie as a cover for the real reason we didn't know on election night, which is so that they could put in the steal. I really got to applaud the deep state here on this amazing piece of evidence, because if I was a sheep, I might look at this and be like, oh wow, it looks like even before the election people were talking about how there could be delays. That would seem to indicate that actually the delays are pretty are make a lot of sense, and it isn't evidence of a conspiracy. But thankfully my eyes have been open to the truth here.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean, Chris Wallace, that's a deep state shield. Did you hear what he said about masks?
I mean, the thing is, like, both sides were telling people to expect delays ahead of time, but they were just telling them to expect delays for different reasons, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
weeks,
Could be months.
until we find out who the new president is. So first for you, sir, finally for the vice president, I hope neither of you will interrupt the other. Will you urge your supporters to stay calm during this extended period, not to engage in any civil unrest? And will you pledge tonight that you will not declare victory until the election has been independently certified? President Trump, you go first.
I'm urging my supporters to go into the polls and watch very carefully, because that's what has to happen. I am urging them to do it. As you know, today there was a big problem. In Philadelphia, they went in to watch. They're called poll watchers, a very safe, very nice thing. They were thrown out. They weren't allowed to watch. You know why? Because bad things happen in Philadelphia, bad things. And I am urging my people. I hope it's going to be a fair election. If it's a fair election, I am 100% on board. But if I see tens of thousands of ballots being manipulated, I can't go along with that. And I'll tell you what,
Which he claims that that's already happening, and yet says, I hope it's a fair election, like trying to give himself an out, like in case he wins, he'll say it's fair,
Number one. Yeah. Number two, they cheat. They cheat. Hey, they found ballots in a waste paper basket 3 days ago, and they all had the name military ballots. They were military. They all had the name Trump on them.
Vice President
you think
Biden,
that's good?
Vice President Biden, final question for you. Will you urge your supporters to stay calm while the vote is counted, and will you pledge not to declare victory until the election is independently certified?
Yes, and here's the deal. They count the ballots, as you pointed out. Some of these ballots in some states can't even be opened until Election Day. And if there's thousands of ballots, it's going to take time to do it. And by the way, our military, they've been voting by ballots since the end of the Civil War, in effect. And that's what's going to happen. Why is it for them somehow not fraudulent? It's the same process. It's honest. No one has established at all that there is fraud related to mail-in ballots, that somehow it's a fraudulent process.
It's already been established. Take a look at Carolyn Maloney's race.
You had an opportunity to respond.
Look at Carolyn Maloney.
Go ahead.
They have no idea what happened.
Vice President Biden, go ahead.
He has no idea what he's talking about. Here's the deal. The fact is, I will accept it, and he will too. You know why? Because once the winner is declared after all the ballots are counted,
Trump still has not accepted.
That'll be the end of it. That'll be the end of it. And if it's me, in fact, fine. If it's not me, I'll support the outcome. And I'll be a president not just for the Democrats. I'll be a president for Democrats and Republicans. And this guy,
I want to
in
see an
fact,
honest
Okay,
ballot cut.
gentlemen,
We-
you say that's the end of it?
Chris,
This is
I
the end
wanna
of this
see an
debate?
honest ballot count.
We're
And I
going to
think
leave
he
it
does
there.
too.
To be continued
does.
as in more debates as we go on. President Trump, Vice President Biden, it's been an interesting hour and a half. I want to thank you both for participating in the first of 3 debates that you have agreed to engage in. We want to thank Case Western Reserve University and the Cleveland Clinic for hosting this event. The next debate, sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates, will be 1 week from tomorrow, October 7th, at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. The 2 vice presidential nominees, Vice President Mike Pence and Senator Kamala Harris, will debate at 9 p.m. Eastern that night. We hope you watch. Until then, thank you and good night.
Wow. I mean, it was quite an hour and a half, as Mr. Wallace put it.
Yeah. So earlier, we were kind of complaining about some of the moderation issues, and I think it's true that they did end up with a lot of wasted time just like interrupting each other, telling each other to shut up. But also they did cover a lot of substantive issues. They did say a lot of real stuff.
They covered a lot of ground. It's just the way in which they covered it was certainly not the most productive or fruitful. I have a hard time believing, that anyone had their mind changed by this debate. Certainly not anyone who's leaning left or right already is now leaning the other direction. Just because it mostly, I think for the most part, this was mostly just preaching to their bases. This is mostly just them being like, yeah, look at, X, Y, and Z story that you've all heard because, you listen to the same media that I do. This guy sucks. Get out and vote. We need to win this thing.
Do you have any different perspective on it now than you had a couple years ago?
No, it's just the same goddamn shit every time. It's just, I don't know what to do about this media landscape we're in, and I think this is a great personification of the problems with it.
Muted mics would be a good start. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, at this point, what's the worst? It can't make it any worse. I mean, we're already in the shitter. Might as well try. I mean, desperate times call for desperate actions, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't allow interruptions, then what you're effectively doing is having people do like dueling speeches rather than
Yeah.
the more like casual style debates that we're used to on Twitch or whatever. But I think dueling speeches probably be better than what we saw
better
this
than
last.
this.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. Well, we are closing in on the end of this event. Do you want to shout yourself out or anything before we're done?
Yeah. What's up, guys? My name is Flowtrace. You can check me out at twitch.tv/Flowtrace, twitter.com/Flowtrace_. I'm going to be live tomorrow, I believe, on Somebody, and Friday I'll be on Wick, and then most Wednesdays I am here.
All right. Thank you for joining us, and I suppose that is the end of today.
Right on. I'll see you.
All right.